right, we're ready to get started this morning. I am so excited to be here. I hope that you are. My name is Shawn Randall. I am the clinical director for the RHD Central Division, and I am really excited that you guys have decided to join us. We want to welcome you to the second annual RHD Trauma Conference, Trauma-Informed Care in 2019. Now what? Now what are we going to do? So if you ask yourself how we got here, we've been talking about trauma-informed care for quite a while, right? Conversations on and off. Trauma-informed care has been a buzzword. It's the expectation, it's not the exception. And our awareness has definitely grown in these last couple of years, not only for the people we serve, but for us as well. We've been laying a foundation and framework for trauma-informed care here at RHD, along with other folks in our community in 2019. Now that we've been talking about trauma-informed care, it's time to be about trauma-informed care. And that was what today is all about. We want to put our awareness into action. We're excited to have everybody along today for this journey in becoming a more trauma-informed community. Today, we are so excited because we have a wonderful panel, a discussion that's going to explore trauma-informed care from various perspectives and how various facets of service provision are impacted by trauma-informed care. And then following that panel discussion, we're going to have our keynote speaker, Dr. Sandra Bloom. She's going to be here to talk about what the big deal is about trauma-informed care, why it's important, what we should know about it, and what it will take for us to all make this necessary shift in our mindset. One program, one person at a time. So trauma-informed care is critical now more than ever in the work that we do and for us as well. Finally, during our afternoon breakout sessions, you will have the opportunity to put your trauma-informed care in action. We want you to be able to take away some nuggets, tools, wrenches, hammers, whatever you need to do your work. And then also in the afternoon, we'll be having an opportunity for you to talk about integrative care. So we'll have a combination of trauma-informed care and integrative approaches in the trauma-informed framework. So we're really excited about that. I want to give a special welcome to all of our folks and thank you to our folks that are joining us by simulcast. So most folks know that RHD is in 15 to 16 states, right? And so we've got folks joining us from all over to be able to watch today's keynote and the panel discussion. We know how hard it is to step away from the work. And then actually our folks in the Central Standard Time are an hour earlier. So they're getting up, making that extra effort to be here with us today. So we really appreciate that commitment. And just a quick reminder for you, those of you watching by simulcast, if you would be sure to complete your sign-in sheets, that's how we're going to give folks their attendance certificate. So if you're viewing with more than one person, please get that sign-in sheet completed for us. And then for those also, the attendance sheets will be on Cornerstone. So I want to shift a little bit of housekeeping for us this morning. We want to talk about your folder. So if you got your folder, making sure you got all the things that you need. So you've got an agenda with a breakout description. There is a color-coded map to get yourself on how you got to get around the buildings if you're not familiar with this large building for you. And then there's also this little handy piece of paper right here. So it's got the Wi-Fi code on it. And it also talks a little bit about our vendors. We've got some wonderful vendors here today, really sharing some of their artwork and some of their best products. Some of them are for purchase, so we'd love for you guys to stop by and check in with them. Also, if you guys saw when you walked in, Headspace has sponsored some space here for the conference, and there is a code there for you to get a year membership for Headspace. So please make sure you download that or go to that website and get the code. And the code's also at the table out by Headspace. Let's see what else we got. And then as far as the Wi-Fi code, just ask that no one be streaming today. We want to save all of our Wi-Fi speed for our presentation. So if you could refrain from streaming, that'd be helpful. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about certificates. All RHD employees will need to get your certificates from Cornerstone. If you are not an RHD employee, please be sure to pick up your attendance certificate at the pond, the table by the pond. They'll be there at the end of the day. Our CEUs, for CEUs for this conference are pending from the state. So if you're planning to receive CEUs, we will be sending out an updated certificate once we get that approval number. We did start early, but those things take time, and we would definitely want to get that to you once we have it. And last but not least, restrooms. If you didn't see them before, they're across from this room just to the right of the main entrance. Want to make sure everyone knows where the facilities are. And just as a hint, if you're not familiar with this building, all the signs are up. So if you look up, you'll kind of get directions and see which way you need to go. All right. And lastly, I want to just thank our volunteers and just do a couple of acknowledgments here. We had a great volunteer staff. This day came together amazingly with lots of hands. For those of you who don't know me, I am from New Orleans, and it's a long ways away to be able to kind of help pull all this together. But if it wasn't for the folks that are here in Philly doing all the hard work, the groundwork, we couldn't pull this day off. So I want to really thank them. Sandy Bloom, we were really excited to have her here, that she made in her schedule to be here. She is a frontier walker in this space of trauma-informed care, so we're really excited to have her. Our DSIC members, DSIC, Department of Clinical Innovation and Quality, that is our clinical team for the corporation. Their help and guidance and just birthing this process, we appreciate them. Thank you to Advanced Staging for our video, sound, and simulcast today. This day wouldn't be the same without you guys helping us with that. And for you guys being here, I don't know if everybody knows, but our internal registration was booked and at max capacity within 48 hours of us posting it on Cornerstone. So that's very exciting. Yes, thank you. It's very exciting. Folks are really excited about the topic. Unfortunately, Marco Giordano, our RHD CEO, was unable to be here, but we would definitely want to thank the executive team for their ongoing support of this effort. And just as a reminder, there are volunteers in all of our common areas to assist with directions. So as we finish up our morning sessions and you're out looking for your breakout sessions, folks will be around to help you. And like I said, there's maps in your folder to also help you if you need that. And we're going to provide additional information about the afternoon breakout sessions after our panel discussion and keynote. And at this time, I would like to introduce another member of the DSIC team who will be moderating our panel discussion this morning, Susan Hunt.
Great. Okay. Everybody where you're at the right spot? Good.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you, Sean. As Sean mentioned earlier, we know more now than ever before about trauma's impact, not only on individual experiences, but those of families, caregivers, coworkers, whole communities. We know that all of us are stakeholders and each of us have a role in creating and sustaining trauma-informed environments. So I'm excited to kick off our day with our panel and really take a look at trauma-informed care from multiple perspectives. And we'd like to take this discussion beyond the theory and philosophy and into real life and talk about the critical importance of being trauma-informed on a day-to-day basis and what that experience is like when you are in a trauma-informed environment and experiencing that, and when you are not, and what is that like. We've assembled a terrific panel here today to share those perspectives. So I'd like to start by introducing, first we're going to introduce Sheila Hall-Prelo. There's Sheila right there. Sheila is a certified peer specialist and program director for Creating Increased Connections, an RHD program primarily run by staff with lived experience and providing recovery-oriented and trauma-informed mental health services. Also delivering mutual aid groups such as RAP and Hearing Voices throughout Montgomery County. I would be remiss in not mentioning that prior to that, Sheila was director of United Peers, which is a recovery program created and fully staffed by certified peer specialists. Oh, some allergies here. Bear with me. Sorry about that. Okay, so we also have Mike Usino. Welcome, Mike. Yeah. Mike is the director of Hope House Crisis Residence and New Perspectives Crisis Services in Northeast PA. And these are programs providing short-term residential and supportive services for adults in psychiatric crisis. So thank you so much for being here. We have Sean White to Mike's, who is a graduate of one of our RHD programs and now working as a certified peer specialist for RHD's Team Arrive. Yeah, which is a mobile service team providing psychiatric rehabilitation, peer support, and tenant support services for individuals with mental health needs. And finally, we have Patty Salamone, who we are thrilled to have here today. Patty, who, among other things, is a special education teacher, an advocate for individuals with special needs, and a proud parent to 3 children, including her daughters, Carly and Christina, who are both participants and artists in RHD's Center for Creative Works program in Wynwood, PA. So welcome. Unfortunately, Laura DeRiggi, Director of Integrated Clinical Consultation Services for Community Behavioral Health and DBH-IDS, that is a mouthful, could not be with us here today due to health reasons, so we wish her well. But we are so happy to have Sheila, Mike, Sean, and Patty share their perspectives today from their varying roles as program director, parent, participant, and peer. All right, so let's get going. Today we are really talking about understanding the impact of trauma and how to create environments and sustain environments that are safe and not re-traumatizing. So my first question for the panel, and whoever wants to respond first is fine. Why is this so important in our day-to-day, in our real life? From your perspective.
I guess I'll break the ice.
Thank you, Sean.
First off, I want to say I'm honored to be here, especially I'm on a panel like this. For me, I experienced going through a program of RHDs that was very trauma-informed. It was a transgender substance abuse mental health program. And for me, it was the very piece that transformed my life. The fact that it wasn't a traditional recovery place. It wasn't where, I would get misgendered or they would use my birth name or, I would be isolated. And so just that environment allowed me to grow and be able to pay more attention to my mental health, my substance abuse, which was really was stopping me from becoming a law-abiding citizen. So, I'm truly grateful for the model itself. As a CPS, I have a lot of passion because I know the importance that it plays. And so, I understand that for me, my experience, everyone's different, like a fingerprint. And so you have to cater to people, meet people where they are, and we have different needs. And so being at Morris House, program of RHDs, allowed that for me. I'm from the Midwest, and so Morris House is like one of the only ones in the United States. And so I feel myself lucky. I'm forever in debt.
Thanks, Sean. Sheila, from your perspective as a peer, why is this so important?
I'm on freeze. My brain just froze up. But it's important because being a peer with co-occurring disorder, a lot of your lifestyle ways when you're out in the streets, you just feel degraded and like you're just worthless. And me, like Sean said, when I came into Family House, which was my 7th program, the reason why I think a lot of those other programs didn't work because they were under this model of tough love, and you sit down, you need to do this. But Family House was different, and they looked at me, not my circumstances or the things I had done or what I had been through. And they just loved on me when I couldn't even love myself. And that was so important because when you coming in broken and you just don't think you should be here, and the last thing you thought about was maybe just killing yourself, because what's the point? And then you walk into a program and they say, hello, Sheila, I love you, and I'm going to love you till you learn to love yourself. That was important to me, and that's what helped me kind of get, I'm 16 years later, and I think it's just the love, and just for somebody asking me, what do I want? Mm-hmm. I think that was very important, just to think that I had enough sense to maybe know that what I needed, mm-hmm. and whatever answer I gave them, even if it was bizarre, they said, well, okay, we can do that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, mm-hmm. And it was bizarre. Okay, but they said, okay, Sheila, let's see how we can make this happen.
Right.
Yeah.
So you know what I'm hearing from both you, Sheila, and Sean, is that when you were in a space that was non-judgmental and safe and empowered you, it created space for your own recovery.
Yeah.
That's powerful.
Yes.
Mike, were you going to say something too?
Now I will.
Oh, okay, good.
So, I'm coming at it from a program perspective as well. So, running crisis and working with this organization and being in this business, to me is very important, because every day we're encountering people who have a history. And that history, good and bad, it makes who they are. And I myself had that same history, right? I had some experiences that sometimes creep up and say boo, and we have to deal with them, and we have to work through that. So learning skills, working in an environment that promotes healing, that promotes understanding where people are coming from, that we're using language that mirrors that, right? So in our programs, for example, we began to change even the language that we use, right? So we went from calling people consumers to they're our guests. They're coming into our program as a guest. They're not there to consume. We stopped using words like they refused to they opted not to, or they chose not to. So we begin to look at how we use language. Language will create an environment where we treat people and have the notions that we create among the people that we come in contact with. So that it also informs me personally. Being trauma-informed informs me about my approach to people and my own history and how does it affect when I work with you. And also, it reminds me not to look at everybody as broken, although we all have a history, not to come in the front like you need me and I need to fix you and I know your trauma, but more like let's work together and let's meet each other halfway. And then it gives me permission to understand my own history, my own issues, and to say it's okay. It's okay that we're a little broken. It's okay that we have these things. And we put that into everything that we do. And I find it interesting because even when we have conversations outside of work, or not in front of the guests, we're still having the same conversation. We're still talking about that healing, and we're still using the same language, which is because we're living it, right? It's not just that fake, I'm in front of you, I'm going to call you Mr. Guest, and I'm going to treat you nice, and then behind your back, I'm going to say how horrible you are. But we're really working towards changing that, and then supporting ourselves, supporting the staff to ensure that there's no vicarious trauma, and there's no transference, and all those things that we talk about, but really how it affects me. That's why we're doing it in our programs. That's what RHD is coming to do. And we're looking forward to continuing to do that because we all have that history. We all have impacted by something in our lives. And sometimes we just don't realize it until it comes up and creeps up and says, boo. And that's when we're here to hold you and say, we're going to love you, and we're going to work with you, and we're going to work together to get you where you need to be.
You know, one of the things that resonated for me with what you just said is that to really be trauma-informed, we have to bring that into our own belief system, whether we're in front of people or not, and that genuineness is so important. And I'm wondering if I could kick it down the table and invite Patty as a parent to Carly and your two daughters at CCW. You know, what are some of the things that you see there or in your experience that are really important pieces of being trauma-informed?
Well, we have two girls, and one's 44 and the other one is 40. So we've come from birth to this stage, and I think the support system that we've had has been excellent. But going back and thinking of each step of their lives, especially education, and then now into a center, which was used to be called workshop, but we don't call it workshop anymore. I looked for the supports, like I said. They used to be in, they've been at CCW now for 4 years, going on 5. And before that, they were in a different one, and they were there for 10 years. While they were there, it was great. It was actually a Catholic-based program. They went to Mass every Wednesday. They loved it. They celebrated all the holy holidays. They loved it. But all of a sudden, I saw that things were happening to them. They weren't engaged. My younger one had her head down. The other one was prancing around the room talking to everybody. They weren't working. There was no jobs. So we became very concerned about this. I didn't want that. I loved that they were there. They were safe, the whole bit. So then we started looking for another program. We did find CCW, and this place is superb. We went to visit it. As soon as I walked in, I was greeted by everybody, including all the participants. There were different areas that the girls could go to. It's art-based. I don't know if you know anything about CCW. It is a very unique program. It's all centered around art production. They have many mediums, clay, woodworking, music, video production, all the painting, pencil, crayon, markers, everything, sewing. What else? They just have everything. So we went around and we looked at all the different areas, and I noticed that all the instructors were very engaged with the girls. And they even invited the girls to come and sit down. They were just there for 5 minutes. Oh, come and sit down. That was very important. Also the safety aspect of it. There was someone at the front door greeting us. It was just a good situation. And everything was very scheduled, which I like for our children, my young ladies actually. And it was good. It's very good actually. So.
Yeah, thank you, Patty. You know, Patty touches on some specific things, from the expression on someone's face who greets you, to engagement, to what's happening, that increase safety and create a place that is more trauma-informed. And I'm wondering, for the rest of our panel, if there are some specific things that kind of let you know, or from a program perspective, some of the things that you are really wanting to see in an environment to make it trauma-informed.
Well, I'll come back to the language.
Yeah.
So I think we need to be looking at organizationally at how we speak, how we present the information, how do we approach people. We work really hard to develop specific treatment plans for the individuals we work with. We have crisis plans. We meet people at the door and we work with them to transition into the process. So every day we're living this in real life. It is about, again, how we talk, how we work with people, how we present, and then how do we then take that back and teach others to how to do it. So real examples to us is, again, the language, the approach, the documentation that we use. When we work with other people, when we go into the community, we talk the same language. We want people to start talking the language we speak. So that's that education without educating. So when we present to the counties, we're talking about our guests, and they're looking at us a little weird, like, who's the guest? Our consumers. And then we talk about the things that we use. So every day we carry it with us, and we take it wherever we go. And that's how I think I have some folks here from our team who would speak to that, because it is, again, about the way we talk, the way we present, and the way we act.
And I think language is very important as well, but I think including the person in the decisions about what you're going to do, how their treatment is going to go. I think being person-centered is very important. Instead of just telling somebody what they need to do, ask them what they want to do.
I mirror echo what she says. Working at Team Arrive has given me another insight. And so by being a person-centered facility, one of the things I heard early in training was that people won't take suggestions and listen to you till they know you care, right? And so just being open-minded and having the sensitivity and, giving, like you said, giving them the opportunity to create their own goal plan. And sometimes, because I remember when I made my goal plans, they was crazy. It wasn't anything like this, right? But, and some of the participants, some of them are far-fetched, but who's to say you could be the president, right? On that journey to trying to accomplish that through the objectives, things change. Confidence builds, thoughts change, and so one of the things I was listening to is that. So one of my team leads told me, and she says, "Listen, we all have experiences, and so when you approach someone, not to approach them so much as, oh, I want to fix you, but to understand that, hey, they have some type of experience, not to be intrusive or invasive, but to be sensitive and to create a rapport to where they feel like they want to open up to you. It's safe to open up." And that was one of the things that I got at Moore's house. And so, I was able to open up in my own time. It wasn't like, what's wrong with you or anything like that. It was like, what happened? Yeah. Okay, they didn't pressure me to talk about things I wasn't ready to talk about. And so I think that's what I think, as continue to grow in the trauma-informed area, if we continue just to, build on them points, just to be open-minded, sensitive, empathetic.
Yeah.
It's a long journey, right? So it's a long journey that we're taking together. And I think about when I travel, my wife will drive a little bit, I'll drive a little bit. So sometimes we'll drive it. Sometimes the person needs to drive it. But at the end of the day, we all need to own the journey together. Because if you own it, you will take charge of it and you will do it. So one of the things we really want to do is empower individuals to own their history, to own their journey. But we're going to drive with you. And sometimes we'll take the wheel. But sometimes we're going to let you definitely drive. And I think that's the key, is making sure that people own what they need to. And I echo both what you said, because that is critical. If it's part of who you are, you're going to own it. And if it means something to you.
So we've, been talking about relationship and language and empowerment. And Sean, you said something that I think I need to just reflect back out because it's so important, that it's not what's wrong with you. It's what's happened in your life, and how does that inform our mutual understanding of where you are and what you may need. And I thank you for saying that, because that's a very important aspect. So I'm going to turn things a little to the other side of the coin. What are some of those red flags? Some of those things that, for folks here, we're all in social services, pretty much, and we're trying to really create these environments. What are some of those things that, in your experience, would let you know, wow, this is not trauma-informed. This is not an environment, that is going to be safe and not re-traumatizing. What are some of the red flags that we need to know about?
Somebody not being able to look you in the eye. Okay, they're doing the intake and they never look up, they never shake your hand and say hello. Okay, it's just about the money. Okay, let's hurry up and get you in the system. That kind of push and not really trying to find out who I am or even my name, like I said. That's a red flag that this is not trauma-informed. I'm just here for money.
Yeah. So the attitude,
yeah.
no eye contact, those are certainly some flags. What else?
I think action tells us a lot. And I'm going to just keep referring to my girls. My younger one is a very bubbly, funny young lady who just loves life. She's on this earth to have a good time every day. That's what she wants to do. My older one is a little bit on the more serious side. She's very focused. She knows what she wants to do every day. So in the past 2 months, Christina's the younger one, Carly's the older one. Christina's really been picking on Carly. And once in a while, she'll give her a good shove. She fell the other day. Carly hurt her arm, had to take her to the hospital. They put her in a splint. She was fine. So what's going on here? So her actions are telling me So I sat down with both girls. Carly said, I don't know. And Christina said, well, she was in my way. I said, well, okay, well, you don't have to push her. So I discussed this with my husband even a little bit more than we had been talking about, and this has been for weeks now. So I said, she's just anxiety ridden, and this has to be the answer. So I called the psychiatrist, and Chris is on anxiety medicine. She increased the medicine a little bit. I have seen a change. And, you know, we talk every day, need to go to the center, relax, have a good time. But I still don't know what's bothering her because her verbalization is a little bit different than everybody else's. But her actions told me what's going on. And I think I'm right. I think I'm okay with that. But I had to watch, you know. But like I said to Susie, I said, I felt like really ridiculous. I was a special ed teacher. I'm retired now. And I would have these parents in these meetings and my kid doesn't do this, doesn't do it at all. I think, oh, okay, yeah, she's not displaying this or that at home. Well, I felt the same way because I said, Chris doesn't do this at home. But she wasn't, she doesn't. So actions are very important for me to say.
Those actions and really listening to a parent or listening to an individual and what they're really trying to say, and taking that in. What else? Anything even getting as concrete as the physical environment that you may walk into? What are some of those? We're on the red flag department, the things we don't want to see.
Well, from a program perspective, you can walk into a building and you have all kinds of symbols and signs that tell you this is an institution. Our policies and procedures around how we deal with people, right? So instead of having policies and procedures that are people-centered, they're more like, you can't do this, you can't do that. Looking at systems and looking at organization from top to bottom of how we talk, how we present, what are our ideas around, is it money? Of course we're running a business, but how do we then combine those things with patient care, that's centered, that's people-centered, that our environments are inviting. We have vehicles that say, for some reason call this number. In some programs, that's not a good thing. So we have even to look at the environment, how we continue to stigmatize our own people. So just being mindful, being present, understanding that, even the way a room looks could be inviting to someone or it could be traumatizing to someone else. So it's just being aware, creating policies that support staff growth and development, that support how staff are going to interact with individuals, lots of training. So if those things are not present, if you're just walking into a building and people are not aware of training opportunities, they're not aware of what our expectations are, they don't have clear roles, they're going to treat people the way they think they want to be treated. So we need to be mindful of environment, of training, of staff, of making sure that the people working with these individuals are okay to work with the individuals. So it's just, as an organization, we have to be very, very mindful of those things from when we hire, how we train, and how we then present those policies and procedures to individuals. And being consistent, and not being afraid of saying to someone, you know what, we need to talk a little bit about that presentation, or we need to have a little conversation about how we approach things so we could all get on the same page and we could all learn from each other. Again, my team's here and they know we will sit in a room and argue with each other and go back and forth because we need to make sure that when we walk out of that room, we're having the best product possible for the individuals that we serve. So all those red flags are present from the top to the bottom. If we're not talking it, then we're just faking it. And it has to be, it has to be driven from the top and it has to be driven from the bottom.
I like that. If we're not talking it, we're faking it. Yeah, that's good. Any other thoughts?
For me, all of the things they said, but I also, like for me, a red flag of a place that's not trauma-informed is when you have staff that will take the acts of a participant and make their decision about it. And so because of trauma for us looks different. Just because someone isn't able to sit down or, go with the traditional, whatever it was given, doesn't mean that they don't want the services or they don't need it. Their circumstances haven't fostered or nurtured them enough to be able to receive it at the time. And I see, I've been in programs where, you do one or two things and you're out. And that's not trauma-informed. Like, it's not just what's on the surface, you know, it's deeper than that. And so them type of things are red flags that let me know that they haven't been educated, or this isn't the place for that. This is a more traditional, outdated method.
Right, it's powerful. You know, and if I add my own thing, I think about an example. It's, you know, in any of our environments, we sort of always have to pay attention to the things that sort of over time fade into the background and we stop noticing. So, you know, I think of an example of a program who has a waiting room and the TV's on in the waiting room. And that waiting room TV program turns to CSI Miami and has all these violent images on and folks are waiting in that waiting room. That's something that you could just sort of let fade and stop noticing, but those are the kinds of things that we have to pay attention to all the time. So moving forward a little bit, a couple more things, and then we're going to open up to some questions from you guys in the audience. From your perspectives, you know, for all of us here in the field, what do you think our priorities really should be now and moving forward in trauma-informed care? What are those really highly important things that you want us to know?
Wow. Okay, well, the list could be endless. I mean, there's so many things that we can do, but I still come back to that top, bottom, top. You know, as an organization, if we're going to be talking trauma-informed in a program, we need to be talking trauma-informed at the top levels of the organization. It has to be driven. You know, Marco's not here, and I'm sure he'll hear this because it's being recorded. He drives it, right? And then he drives it down, and then we own it, and we take it up. We need to be putting those things in a framework that is expected of each individual. From the person that cleans the building to the person that runs the building, we all need to be aware of trauma-informed care. I used to, in another life, I worked at the Children's Home of Reading, and even our custodians were trained in the sanctuary model because they needed to understand what was going on with all our participants and the kids. So every person was on the same page. We need to see that. We need to educate our staff a little bit better. We need to provide training and opportunities for training and for growth, and to deal with their own trauma, to deal with their own issues, to deal with their own stuff they bring to the table, because we all bring it, you know. And then recognition that trauma affects a person and their environment. It affects an organizational environment. It affects the way even funders look at us, because if we're not dealing with people at those levels, sometimes even funders are looking at us like we're not doing what we need to do. So it affects the bottom line. So I think those three things for me is organizational structures that support trauma-informed care and drive it, staff members who buy into it and own it and recognize that it is important, and then having an environment that supports that all the way up and down.
So those are some three major priorities. What else?
I think with members and staff that we should err on the side of love. Instead of just assuming that somebody's trying to be a smart ass or just an attention seeker, just err on the side of love. Okay, especially if you're just sensitive, not simple, you know, not just this person is just trying to get on my nerves, they're trying to do this, you know, on that negative note, just like, how about let's love them, okay, and just find out what's really going on for them instead of just making quick judgments about people. Get to know somebody, get to know their story. Don't just assume because somebody comes in and says that they've been raped out twice, and just because they got on booty shorts that they asked for it. You know what I'm saying? Like, maybe they don't know any better. Maybe that's all they have to wear. Let's err on the side of love and try to get people back to a place where they're comfortable just being. Okay, just being, just feeling like a human being again. Stop making snap judgments about people. Yeah.
Thank you, Sheila. That's err on the side of love.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Patty.
I think in my situation, being a parent and having the girls in the center, that the staff is well informed about all the participants. That's hard. It's a difficult job. There's a lot of participants there, but the staff is informed, and I appreciate that. They have meetings almost daily, which is to me, excellent, because that means their communication is going around. And safety is very important. I wouldn't leave my girls there if I didn't feel they were safe. And I can tell they're safe because if something happens, you get a phone call. Even if it's not about one of the girls and it's something happened. So I believe that this communication is very important. I think that the staff has to know about all the participants, and they run a tight ship, and it's so important to us.
So we don't have Laura here, but I'm going to toss a question that you might not be prepared for, but we're going to toss it out anyway before we get to our audience questions. You know, if we had the government funder, payer, policymaker right here, and you could tell them anything and have them do any kind of policy, what would it be?
Well, coming from my perspective, just as me receiving services and offering services, I think that effective services and communication is important. And so I think as far as being able to have the needed time, necessary time to nurture the relationships, to build the rapport, to build the trust is needed. And I think that in the field, staff, people are overworked, and you know, sometimes participants don't get the just services as the benefits as if we did have more time to spend with them and to help see them through. And just understanding that, you know, every participant is different, and so they got different needs, and so we should offer different care and approaches. And so that would indicate that we would need time to do that. So I don't know, I guess that's what I would tell the people with the money.
Any other things on the wish list?
Yeah, well, you know, I think funding sources continue to change in this different streams, and we talk about value-based purchasing, and we talk about all these other things that are coming down the pike. I think if I had the opportunity to tell someone, I would be talking about the fact that there has to be better coordination. We have to allocate resources accordingly. I think that, you know, there's enough misery to go around, right? So I think that we can combine, and we can use the funds to really focus on healing. Because what they want from a funding perspective is they want to utilize their dollars for the best product for the least amount of cost, right? So how do we incorporate trauma-informed, and how do we incorporate our practices to make us more viable to those funders, and to be able to say to them, we're keeping your folks out of hospitals, out of higher levels of care because of what we're doing. So work with us to create regulations and policies that support what we're trying to do. Let's look at funding sources and how we allocate dollars to ensure that we're providing the most amount of service for the most amount of people. So if they have the money to make those decisions, that's what we need to be looking at, is how we allocate, how do we then present ourselves to those funders so we can get those dollars. And again, that starts from staff A all the way up the line. So I'm looking at it from a programmatic perspective, right? From an individual, I'm with you. Take care of me. Take care of what we need to do. From a business is, how are we going to make sure that we get your dollars and that you want to invest in us? Because we are, if you look, you know, back in the day when we have phone books, for some of you young people, they may not know that. If you wanted to be number one in the phone book, you chose names like AAA. So when they opened the book, you were the first one there. So how are we going to be the first one people think of when they think of human services and mental health and housing? By doing those things, by creating our own future, right? The only way to predict it is to create it. So we start doing that now in the way we talk to people, in the way we present our services, and in the way then we go after dollars. So if the people with money were here, we'd probably hold them hostage anyway, but we want that money to be coming to us as much as possible.
Yeah, but I think success also foster that.
Correct.
You know, when you have the answer, the money comes. You know, and I think that whomever that's donating the monies or whatever, if you have a system or a program that works, that it's actually producing things, then that'll come.
Of course.
And so,
Yes.
yeah, but
Yeah, we got to walk the walk and talk the talk. You know what I mean? We got to be able to do this.
I think that the people in Harrisburg are not as well informed as they should be. for example, just a couple weeks ago, we were notified that our participants had to be out of the workshop a certain % of the time. So, and this came down from Harrisburg. So we invited the person that we got the letter from. I didn't hear back from her. And I took, another parent and I took it upon ourselves, instead of Lori doing this, I'll call. I called, I sent an email, I sent another email, I called and called. She finally responded to me and said that she really didn't have the time. Okay, well then you didn't have the time, but you don't understand what we're doing. So you need to be informed. Before you make all these decisions, you need to know what we're doing. And then also to respect the participants that are in that workshop, or center. Take workshop away, center, because maybe my daughters don't want to go out 30% of the time. Maybe they love what they do. Why do they have to go out? But so I'll continue to ask her to come and to visit and see what's going on. And also one other point that I think that I'm on a bandwagon about this, that how many people either have a special needs child or someone in their family, relatives, or that they've been directly involved with are on that board to make these decisions. I want to know. And one thing being about a teacher, I just couldn't stand our school board members because none of them had special need kids. And they were making these decisions. So I think they need to be informed. They need to come and visit. And I don't care how many centers, how many places are in Pennsylvania, hire people and do it that way.
So thank you. You've really made that case for the need for all of us in this room to really advocate and keep calling and keep emailing for what we need and what our participants need, and also the need for representation of parents and family members on boards and as part of the policy making and decision making. So thank you, it's a good point.
We went to Tim Briggs, who is our state representative in King of Prussia, and we made an appointment with him. Unfortunately, his wife was ill. I understand, but make another appointment. And I guess I just really feel that our participants are not being respected. And we're like at the bottom of the list. And I'm doing this for a long time. 44 years is a long time. And you learn who gets it and who doesn't, who's serious, who's sincere. So, you know.
So, before I turn it over to the audience for questions, is there anything you guys on this panel really want the folks in this room to know and to leave here with? That's fair, isn't it?
Keeping it real simple, I think that every person matters, right? Every individual matters, and that we can make a difference if we're willing to learn. And it's okay to have a little hesitation and a little fear in this kind of work. And it's okay to be a little bit broken. You know, it's a little bit to be a little messed up sometimes, because that's who we are. And that's what makes us great helpers, and he makes us great people, and he puts us in this room because we care. So that's what I want you to take.
Great.
Keep advocating, keep fighting, and keep learning.
Wonderful. Thank you. Anything else? All right. Well, we have a few minutes to ask any questions of our panel from the audience. I think what we'll do is, if you, since we're simulcasting, if you can just stand up and ask your question, I'll repeat it for folks who are viewing from different areas. So any questions? Yeah, can you stand up?
Of all you sitting here, have you ever encountered someone that you work with that you think has good intentions but maybe isn't practicing trauma-informed care as well as they could be? And how did you approach that? Obviously, if someone is egregiously not doing it, then they shouldn't be working there. but how can you assist a fellow coworker working with other individuals to maybe better practice this in a patient way?
So if I just sum up for our folks viewing, the question is, have you ever encountered someone who isn't really responding in a way that you would like, and how do you approach that person, and what are some of the things that you need? Did I get that? Okay, good.
So I'll approach it from a managerial perspective, right? So as a supervisor, if I see something like that, then I use a phrase, and I don't want to say in front of my staff because they don't know what I mean now, but I use the phrase, help me understand, right? So I'm going to help me understand. I'm really asking you is what the heck were you doing? But I want to ask you in a way, that makes sense, like help me understand what was going on here, right? And then try to present the individual with options about how it impacts that individual, about our expectations for what we do, and what are their needs. Do you need more? Was it that you got triggered? Was it an issue that impacted you? Let's work with you. Let's have empathy with you first and make it to you, and then we could get to what we need to. But then really being honest and open about the expectation and about the support that the individual needs. Because if it's egregious, we may need to go in a different direction. But it's okay to make mistakes. We struggle a lot in the gender realm, right now with all the different things and how we talk to someone and the different pronouns and all the different things that we need. But we know our new perspectives on Hope House that if I call you he and you want it to be called she, I apologize and it's a mistake and it's not going to happen again. It's okay that I did not know. But now I will be trained and I will learn and I will treat you the way, the golden rule is treat people how you want to be treated. It really is treat people how they want to be treated. So I'm going to treat you the way you want to be treated, but I got to learn how you want to be treated. So we got to educate each other, and then have clear policies and procedures for how expectations are at work.
Anyone else want to respond?
Often, when we hire CPS, they are fresh in recovery, and they want the participants to get the recovery the same way they do. So a lot of times, thank God for grace, because most experiences in my life, I use myself and how I felt when somebody was trying to just tell me how I should get recovery and how it felt for me, and remind them that everybody's recovery is different. And while we do get frustrated sometimes when we see potential in people and they're not living up to that we still need to be really patient with everybody's process, and that their recovery is not ours. And matter of fact, I had to learn that myself. Okay, I really, because the same way, as soon as I got recovery, like everybody's going to get recovery, everybody's going to go to school, they're going to do this, and it's going to be a perfect world. And I got smacked in the face a lot of times. So from that experience, I'm able to tell them that story, okay, and that we need to be really sensitive about how we approach each individual in spite of the fact that we see something in them. Okay, our job is just to travel with them until they get to that point. Okay, we can make suggestions along the line, but when we start that you should, we out of line.
Yeah, take the shoulds out of it. Patty.
As a special ed teacher, I had several colleagues who just didn't get it. I almost actually thought, why are you even in this field? And one particular boy that I had, he was just really imbalanced. He was chemically imbalanced. He was abused terribly. And my one colleague just said, well, just get rid of him, just get rid of him. And after weeks of telling in my ear, I finally sat down with her and I said, there are reasons for this child acting out this way, so we have to find out why he's acting this way, and then maybe we'll be able to help him, and you need to stop picking on him and trying to get rid of him. And I think from that point on, she was a little careful, but I still think that, you know, you have to be just upfront and forward and say what you believe.
Just put it out there.
Put it out there.
Thank you. Any other questions for our panel? Yeah.
Can you tell me maybe one or two things you did at your programs or you've seen at a program to help create a safe space for people that may have been affected by trauma?
So the question is, one or two things that you've done or seen done that really helped a person affected by trauma?
Well, we implemented W-trim and M-trim. That was really effective because we knew that a lot of our women and men had trauma, and we needed to create a space for them to be able to talk about it and process through it. But I also have had staff members who have experienced trauma and have been traumatized by participants. And one experience most recently, I called up RHD. I talked to Susan and Pam, and I asked for help and ways to support them through it. We did a different kind of work schedule. What is that thing called, Susan? We had to go to HR and get some kind of addendum, accommodation, yeah. We did an accommodation for her, and instead of just saying, you got to come off the schedule because you might traumatize somebody else, we gave her supports daily, and glory be to God, she's doing well.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's doing very well.
So you've really pulled out a very important aspect of trauma-informed care, which is us, our
Yes,
staff,
staff,
and what
our
we need
staff.
in understanding. And Sheila, just briefly, you mentioned W-TREM and M-TREM. For anyone who might not be familiar with that, can you just say what that is?
W-TREM is Women's Trauma Recovery Empowerment Model, and it's a 24-week course, and we provided it to our participants, and we're actually doing, United Peers is actually doing M-TREM now, and people that didn't even talk for like years, when we got together in that space of safety and just loving on each other, okay, a lot of things came out. And after just doing that group, it gave me more sensitivity on how to deal with some of the girls. And they weren't just acting out of being nasty. They had been through some stuff. And it was just so helpful on getting to know the participants and the members better. Just that one group.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So we have time for another question or two. Yeah.
So I wanted to ask the panel, do you think that running collaboratives among providers from different disciplines would strengthen what we do in the model of trauma-informed approaches, essentially based on the fact that there was a time that resilience was the buzzword, but trauma was nowhere on the horizon? The two are the antithesis of each other. So development of both together would have more positive outcomes.
So I'll just quickly repeat. So the question is, as the panel, do you think it would be effective for providers to create learning collaboratives? It sounds like to really discuss the different aspects of providing trauma-informed care, where they might conflict, where they're together, and sort of what's the next step. I hope I did okay on that.
Well, I mean, I think that makes sense, right? So if we're working together with other people and creating a similar language and creating a similar culture, then I think that that's going to enhance what we do. You know, our participants, our guests go from systems to systems. And sometimes they come into a system that's very trauma-informed. They really focus on recovery, focuses on the individual, and then they go to another program. That model is not the same. There may be more of a medical model, there may be more of a tough love model, whatever. So we need to be able to talk to each other and learn from one another. And that includes the funders, and that includes the people in Harrisburg, and that includes coming together and having those conversations. Because the more we learn about what the trends are, we use Seeking Safety as an organization in a lot of our programs. It's an evidence-based group model, TREM, all the different things. But is someone else using the same model? Do they understand what that model, even acronyms? I guarantee you, we sit in this meeting just like you did right now, and you clarified an acronym. But we'll sit in meetings and somebody will say WTF, and we just sit there like, oh, okay. We should be raising our hands saying, what the heck does that mean? Let's get on the same page, let's get on the same language. So I think that if we start working together, it's just going to make us better. Our motto is together we're better, and we believe that if we're out there doing those things, I just plug the organization.
Thank you.
If we do those things, we're going. You saw that, Dennis, right? We're going to get better at what we do. So.
Yes, thank you. Anyone else? Any other questions? Make sure. Okay, then I want to say an enormous thank you to our panelists, each of our panelists who are here, and thank you for sharing your perspectives. I think it's been very informative and very powerful. So thank you. If we could all give them a hand. So it's time for a break. And I'm actually letting you out a little early, but you need to be back. We're going to start promptly at 10:45 for our keynote speech. Thanks.
Okay. We're going to find our seats and get started for the part of the day I'm sure many of you have been waiting for. First piece, a bit of housekeeping. All of you have evaluations in your folders. So before you leave today, we're asking everyone to turn in those evaluations. I know for RHD folks, a lot of times you do them on Cornerstone, but we want you to complete those and turn them in before you leave today. And if anybody had an extra seat next to them during the last presentation, can you raise your hand? I think we were pretty full. There's like 2 seats and 3 seats. Okay. Okay. All right, here we go. You guys, this is RHD and 2 things and we're exactly on time. That is a miracle in itself. Okay. So it is my honor and my privilege to introduce our keynote speaker today, Dr. Sandra Bloom. I had the opportunity to speak to Sandy for a few minutes outside, and she said, don't do an intro. They have it in their packets. You don't really have to do all that stuff. So here's my crossed out. But there are a couple of things I want to highlight. So as most of us know, we know Dr. Bloom as the founder of the Sanctuary Model. And the Sanctuary Model, just in case anybody doesn't know here, is a theory-based, trauma-informed, trauma-responsive, evidence-supported, whole culture approach with a clear and structured methodology for creating and changing organizational cultures. And I think that really goes with what we were talking about earlier in the panel of the need for an entire cultural shift when we talk about trauma-informed care. And between 2005 and 2016, over 350 social service, juvenile justice, and mental health organizations were trained in this model, including our own 11th Street, Stephen and Sandra Scheller Family Practice Network. They joined in 2012. Currently, Dr. Bloom is the co-chair of a new national organization, the Campaign for Trauma-Informed Policy and Practice, whose goal is to advocate for public policies and programs at the federal, state, local, and tribal levels. And I wanted to share their mission statement because many of us in this room have tried to write mission statements in the past, and I think that this was one of the best that I've ever read. The mission statement is to create a trauma-informed society where individuals and families have the supports necessary to thrive. Boom, that's like drop the mic. Yeah. To many of us in this room, Dr. Bloom is the pioneer of trauma-informed care, not only recognizing the impact of trauma on the individual, but also the complex interactions between the traumatized individuals we serve, overstressed staff, and pressured organizations, proposing that the change must be a holistic approach that affects each and every part of the system. Dr. Bloom was talking about the parallel process of trauma long before most of us heard the term trauma-informed care. The title of her keynote, What's the Big Deal About Trauma?, fits perfectly with the theme of this conference, Trauma-Informed Care in 2019, Now What? As Dr. Bloom will discuss the importance of trauma-informed care, the need to become trauma-responsive in our work and in our lives. So please give a warm welcome to Dr. Sandra Bloom.
Very good. Hi, everybody. Wow, what a great crowd. This is very cool that you're all here. Can you all hear me? We good? Okay. Oh, you missed my pretty slide. Wait a minute. You got to see the brain. It's very cool. Look. So what I want to cover today is kind of getting everybody on the same page around the knowledge base to really, because I anticipate that you will all be teachers, not just students, not just therapists, but also teaching this, because it is critical if we're going to get anywhere that this knowledge gets out to the public. That's why we're involved in CTIP in trying to educate members of Congress, which is not easy. So you need to be advocates and teachers as well. So let's all be on the same page about what it's about, right? And I gave this title, What's the Big Deal About Trauma? Because I'm sure there must be some people in the room that are going, oh, God, I hear about this all the time now. What is the big deal? There's always been trauma, and you're absolutely right. There has always been trauma, but we didn't really know much about it. So we're in the midst of, how many of you have heard of a paradigm shift? Okay, all right. Does anybody wonder what in the world that is? A paradigm shift is, the reason why we're emphasizing that is that it's a really big deal. It's a change in our way of thinking, and it's meant to indicate a real revolution, a transformation in the way we think, and therefore in what we do and the way we behave. And it's driven by people. So it's being driven by a lot of people in this room. I was helped to drive it as well. So that's really critical, is being a trauma champion, meaning that you get what it's about and you influence other people. So this is a picture. Oh wait, I'm not helping you because I'm doing two things at once. Okay, so this is about knowledge. All right, so it's an iceberg, because what we usually pay attention to, we being the big we in our culture, and also we as mental health social service people, we pay a lot of attention to the events that go on day to day, minute to minute, the things that happen, the way people behave, their symptoms, things like that. But underneath all that are the patterns of behavior. So one of the things you learn when you're training as a professional is what are the patterns, what to look for, what clues you off that there's something else going on. But what's harder to see are the system structures. What is really happening below the surface within our systems that's actually determining those patterns and determining the events. And then way down deep are the mental models. Now, mental models are the very basic values and assumptions that we all have been developing since we were born, really. And they're largely unconscious until you start really thinking about them. And then the ocean, the water that the iceberg is in. Let me tell you about that. the ocean, no, okay, so the ocean is our worldview. And our worldview is even deeper and all surrounding. It's the deeply embedded beliefs and assumptions that really describe reality. We are, for the most part, really unaware of our worldviews until we become aware, but lots of time conflict that is really fundamental between people is because we're in conflict around actually we view the world in a different way. And it represents our individual or our culture's answers to fundamental questions. And they become mental habits that form an important part of each of our identity. So that's the ocean that all of that iceberg is in. What a paradigm shift is about is changing all of that. So this is from a business book from the 90s, and they said, we are currently in the early stages of a tremendous change in the dominant worldview, a shift in age as large as in its implications as the movement from the Middle Ages through the Renaissance to the machine age and to our age, right? So the last big shift in paradigm is medieval to modern. That's what a big deal it is. And we don't even know what it was like to live in medieval times. We don't have any foot in that worldview, but it was way different than the world we live in now. And I think that's a big part of why our world feels so tumultuous, because this paradigm that has been governing Western society and really the whole world for hundreds of years, it's shifting. And when things shift that deeply, it's scary. And it's scary for everybody. Just different people respond to fear in different ways. So a picture of what that looks like looks like this. So worldview is there. A paradigm then represents pretty much the scientific rules and the scientific understanding that informs is the underpinning for the worldview. And then what changes is the mental models, and then our attitudes, and then our behavior. So this is what makes this trauma thing such a big deal. You can't just think that anywhere that you can just go tell people to behave differently and they'll do that. You know as well as I do that behavior is influenced by people's attitudes, what people bring into the situation. But what people are largely unaware of is that their attitudes are being determined by these really deep mental models, and that only changes it in our world if the science of that changes, and that will profoundly influence our worldview, which is also shifting. So, example. Right now, in our present system, if you're mentally ill, if you're sick, you will get shunted over to the mental health system. If you're bad, you will get shunted over to the criminal justice system. And if you're sick and bad, nobody wants to deal with you. Right? And what trauma theory says is not useful, not really useful, either one, that we're really talking about people, the manifold ways that people can be injured over the course of the lifespan. And it's a completely different mental model once you start working with it. So that's just an example of what I mean by how big a deal this is. It's really hard. So if you find yourself going back and forth and doing things later that are not trauma-informed, and other people aren't doing things that are trauma-informed, it's because it takes us a long time to make these kind of shifts. The sooner we do it, the better the results, but it takes us a long time. And that's really the reason why a paradigm shift is because they end up doing better. You get better results, and that's the point of having it shift. Okay, so I have come to believe that the study of trauma and adversity is the paradigm shift in understanding human nature, which is what we do. We are the experts in understanding human nature. And that's why this is so important to us. Now, there are all kinds of things shifting in other parts of our reality, other parts of the world, but this is the one that matters so much for us and why it's so important to take it on. Trauma is really a central organizing principle, I've come to believe, of human thought, feeling, belief, and behavior that basically has been ignored in our previous existing explanation of why people do what they do. And that's influenced everybody, from our individuals all the way up to families. And I've come to believe that trauma theory is about, the best way to think about it, because we have this word called trauma, which is a problem because we're not just talking about things that can be clearly defined as traumatic. We're also talking about all kinds of circumstances, all kinds of things that happen to people that are really bad to happen to you, aren't necessarily traumatic, but that really take a toll on your health and well-being, right? So I've started calling it instead the science of suffering. That's really what it's about, is the way that people suffer, the way, as a culture, we make a lot of people suffer unnecessarily. And the idea is that most suffering is preventable, and we choose not to prevent it. That's a really big deal. That's really important. And most of the suffering that I'm talking about really begins in childhood. And we didn't used to know that. In fact, up until pretty recently, we thought that kids didn't even remember bad things that happened to them. Right? So that's a big shift to actually think more and behave very differently towards children. So why is this all such a big deal? Well, there's kind of three main reasons. Attachment and disruptions in attachment are universal. It doesn't matter where they happen in the globe. It's not good for humans. And the human stress response is universal. Everybody responds with body and mind to overwhelming stress. Oh, see, this is hard. Okay. I have to be really coordinated. All right, maybe this will be better. And trauma and adversity are everywhere. Okay, they're happening right now as we speak, right blocks from here and across the globe. But we're not just talking about suffering. We're also talking about learning and spreading the learning about healing, recovery, and transformation, post-traumatic growth. I'm not so sure about the concept of resilience. I've always been kind of ambivalent about it because I'm afraid it's going to be used as judgment as to who's resilient and who isn't. But people do and can grow after a traumatic event, and that's called post-traumatic growth. Okay. So we're going to all get on the same page. Let's start where it starts, with parenting. This probably doesn't come as a shock to you, but parenting matters. And really, we have not paid much attention to that in the past. So it's a really big shift, this whole issue of adversity. And what we're really focused on now is how helpless kids are when they're born. It's part of our species. Our infants are more helpless than any other species for a longer period of time. Can't do anything. Very different. You watch a horse give birth and the baby is out of the womb and starts feeding and jumps around and can run. Not our babies. They can't do squat for a long time, right? So that's huge. So underneath all humans is the issue of prolonged helplessness. And that matters a lot in terms of our wanting to control everything. We are control freaks. And the more trauma you've had, the more you've suffered as a result of being helpless, then the more controlling you're likely to be. The serve and return relationship between mother, I'm going to call mother the primary caregiver because she usually is, but not always. But that serve and return relationship is critically important to the development of the child's brain. And babies are doing that as soon as they're born. So we come equipped with a capacity for relationship. And in the absence of that serve and return relationship, our brains don't work right. Our body and our brain doesn't get integrated properly. We don't know how to manage emotions properly. All of that is going on in those very early months and for the subsequent months in a child's life. So you're all professionals. You are dealing with people who have been wounded, but you don't see them back then. You don't, for the most part, see the babies. You see the children or adolescents or, in many cases, adults. So it's hard for you to know, and they can't tell you because all this goes on before we have any words. It's going to be several years before language kicks in for us to use. The ability to use language is innate. We're born with it. But we have to develop it over time. And you've all been around little kids, you know that. And yet we didn't take into account what that really meant. When all of this brain stuff is happening before we even have words for it. And it means that those early experiences are being encoded in the nonverbal part of the brain and in the body. And that's a problem later when people come into therapy, when all we have to do in therapy is talk to them. And they can't talk about those things because they don't have any encoding in words for those early experiences. And yet that's making all the difference. That's a big shift for us. That's huge. So we come into the world with a brain that is ready to learn how to biologically regulate, but it's not yet, obviously, in a newborn. We come into the world ready and doing social interactions right away. We are the most social of all species. We come into the world already with emotions. Anybody been around a baby, you know they're feeling stuff. So they're all there. We just can't regulate them yet. We're ready for language. We're ready. We're learning from maybe before we're even born, we don't know. But certainly from the moment we're born, we're learning. And it looks like we're also wired for moral development when we're born. And then we need, for all of these, we need the interactions with other humans to really prepare us to do any of those things that are the underpinning for those aptitudes. Now, that baby, those baby pictures I just showed you, they come into the world with brains, of course, but the brain isn't connected yet. So most neural development occurs after birth. Brains are built from the bottom up. Those babies are making 1 million new neural connections a second. That's how important what's going on in the environment is for those young, very young children. The genes just supply the basic blueprint that this process is going to unfold. It doesn't determine what the process is going to be. We come into the world with twice as many neurons as we're going to have, and you see the picture of that. So look at the 2-year-old. You see how complicated that looks? And kind of like a 2-year-old? Okay, so a 2-year-old has twice as many neurons as we're going to have by the time we're 6. And if you look at the 6-year-old brain segment there, it's much better organized. Between the ages of 2 and 6, we lose half of our neurons. And much of the early brain wiring is getting, well, it's like pruning a shrub. You know how you get it into a certain form. That's what's happening in our brains. And what is determining that? Not our genes. Our genes are determining that that's going to happen. But how it actually happens, what actually gets hooked to what, is determined by the child's early childhood environment. So think about that for a second. Think about what we've done as a society in the last 50 years, where babies are put into childcare. Parents don't have any choice about that. But we haven't considered, as a society, the implications of that. We didn't have the science available yet for that. We do now. So we need to look at early childhood and what kind of children do we want for the future. The earliest attachments in children are formed by the age of 7 months, between 7 and 9 months. Then you see it as stranger anxiety, where before that you could bring in a babysitter that the baby didn't know, and after that, no way. And that's why. And it's a developmental stage. It means the child has formed a specific attachment. Nearly all infants become attached, and only to a few people. Humans become the most social of all species, and we certainly attach more than that as we grow. But in early childhood, it's very specific. Why? Well, because the child is borrowing the adult's brain as the scaffolding for development. So they're developing, and that's why all that comforting and the cooing and the holding and all that kids need, it's actually helping the brain develop the way it's supposed to. And without that, the brain doesn't develop the way it's supposed to. We know now that what happens is that children develop what's called an internal working model. Everybody in this room has an internal working model that you developed way back when, what I'm describing. And it becomes then the blueprint for all subsequent relationships. So now it's a blueprint, which means it can change. But you know, if you've done any building or been on any building projects, that the further along the building gets following the blueprint, and then you try to go back and change it, the harder it is, right? Same thing. So what is the internal working model? Well, it tells us how to manage emotions. It tells us how we're supposed to behave. It tells us how to care for others. It tells us how to care for ourselves. And that's going to be a predictor then of how we care for our children once they're born. And it gives us a set of expectations for what we can expect in relationships and out of life. And it tells us what we should remember and what we should forget. So that's all the working model, blueprint that's in there. And we don't think about that. It's really hard to think about because all this happened before we had any words. All right, to be effective, attachment figures have to soothe the child's anxiety. Remember, kids don't have emotional regulation. They can't handle things. So we have to calm them down. What kinds of things scare children? When they feel sick, when they're tired, when they're hungry, when they hurt. When anything in the environment is threatening, because they don't have any context for what's going on in the world, so anything can be scary and threatening. And then any uncertainty about where the attachment figure is or what the attachment figure is doing. So think about alcohol abuse, think about drug abuse, think about maternal depression, right? Where the mom is able to do the anxiety relieving measures and then maybe not able to because of the problems that she's having. And think about little kids being put into situations where there are 30 little kids and only 2 staff people. Okay? Getting the idea? What a big shift this means. And relaxation and anxiety on the part of the child will only happen if the caregiver is sensitive, accepting, cooperative, accessible, and available. All that crap from the past about don't go comfort a child, wrong. Just completely wrong, wrong-headed. There's a lot of things we do to children that we really need to rethink based on what we now know about children that we didn't used to know. Okay, then there are sensitive periods for, development of the brain. The fetal period, when the baby's in the womb,
during infancy and early childhood, what I've just been telling you about, and then again in adolescence. How many of you work with teenagers? Oh, not that many. All right, good for you guys. Because you have a second chance. All right, wait. How many of you have teenagers at home? Ah, yeah, okay. So it is an enormous, often missed opportunity, because the reason why teenagers are so weird and are okay, and then overnight, like there's an alien in your house. The reason that's the case is because of the sex hormones, but it's not just about sex. It's a lot about sex, but it's not just about sex. All of that hormonal change is changing the whole brain. So it's another opportunity to intervene for a child who's really had significant problems. So we need to be doing a lot more work with adolescents, because they won't listen to their parents. They need other people to talk to, other adults. Okay, how about moral development? Well, we construct a moral universe based on our experience. You can't teach somebody right from wrong. You can show people right from wrong. But just because you say this is right and this is wrong doesn't mean, obviously, that people are going to follow that. It has to be driven emotionally. It has to be driven through role modeling. And a lot goes wrong with that. And it goes wrong at the level of the brain architecture. There is now a lot of research about the brain changes in people who we can easily diagnose as sociopath or psychopaths. They have messed up brains. There's kind of no question about that anymore, although it's not well distributed knowledge yet. But what you'll see is that for most of them, they've experienced a moral injury. When it occurs in childhood, it may influence preferences away from empathy, away from altruism, away from mutuality, and towards self-protection and self-interest. And if that happens to enough people in the population, then that becomes normal. Think about what's going on in this country. Okay, so on the road to adulthood, attachment determines whether our bodies can regulate properly, whether our emotions can be modulated, whether our cognitions are integrated with our emotions, how we are socially, whether we can get along with other people and develop sustaining relationships, and what our moral development is. It's all related to early childhood attachment experiences. And that's why it's so important that you become very knowledgeable, because whether you know it yet or not, that's what you're dealing with. You are dealing with people who have had often profoundly disrupted attachment experiences, and they don't have a clue that's what their problems are related to. They think that's, just like the rest of us have thought that. They don't know that there's any connection. And making those connections for people is the beginning. I said before I started to a colleague that the real beginning to the road to recovery from anything is psychoed. It's really education. And so it's really important that people in general understand this. And then the complex integrated function that we do or don't develop determines what kind of citizens we become. And so if we have disrupted attachment, we are likely to replicate that in the world around us. So we know now that the natural environment of childhood is, and we look at, and by natural I mean we were hunter-gatherers for a very, very long time before we developed this modern culture we're living in. So there is underneath a first nature. And our first nature is that parenting is shared by a lot of adults. Both adult males and females are readily available. That parenting is never private. It can't be hidden from the group. No secrets. And the dangerousness of the outside world is evident compared to the safety of the social group and one's family. For many, many people that you're dealing with, the opposite is the case. that it is the unnatural environment of childhood that they've experienced, where parents have been separated very early from infants, where they've had to raise kids alone, pretty isolated, and with isolated families, often keeping a lot of secrets as part of our natural loyalty. Extreme privacy with absolute authority of parents, which is fine if you're a great parent, not so fine if you're not. Seeing children as private property. Unclear but all surrounding sense of danger. So many of our children aren't safe in their families, and they're not safe in their communities. And few opportunities, therefore, for social support, emotional modulation, and stress relief. And then we wonder why kids can't do well in school, or why they can't really be adequate in the workplace, or why they end up on the streets and doing drugs. It's no mystery anymore why that happens. So, it's clear what kids need to grow into healthy adults, but what do they actually get in America? How many of you already know about the ACEs study? Adverse Childhood Experience Study? All right, you go, RHD. Proud of you. Okay. How many of you don't know, so I should tell you about it? How many are curious? I just need one hand. Okay, good. So this is a really important study that was done now. It's over 20 years old. And it included almost 18,000 people. And when I show you the results, I want you to keep in mind this is a solidly white middle-class study, okay, to begin with. It's all done on people in San Diego who all worked. They were all part of a health management, managed care company, or healthcare company. And the objective was to look at the health and social effects of exposure to childhood adversity across the lifespan. So the ACEs score is used to basically do a kind of fast and dirty assessment of stress in childhood people have been exposed to. Most of the folks that did this original study were 50 or older. So they were looking back at their own childhood. And this is the reason these categories existed was simply because this is what the researchers who were doing this, what they had seen in their population. So 10 categories. You get a point for every belonging in each category. So the possibilities are 0 to 10. So maltreatment, physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, physical neglect, emotional neglect, and or living in a household with someone who was mentally ill, somebody who was a substance abuser, where there was domestic violence, where your parents were separated or divorced, or where anybody was incarcerated. Those are the ACEs categories. So looking back, when you were 18 or younger, did any of those things happen to you? Okay, what did we find? Well, it was pretty startling what they found, and they did not expect to find this. But ACEs increases the risk in a strong and graded fashion for basically any kind of mental illness, including psychotic illnesses. Substance abuse, all kinds, direct and clear. The higher the ACEs, the more likely somebody is to be addicted to alcohol, drugs, or both, or other things. Because humans can get addicted to anything, right? Shopping, food. The higher the ACE score, the more likely people are to suffer from the diseases that will result in the 10 most common causes of death, including heart disease and cancer and autoimmune disease. The higher the ACEs score, the more likely people are to have sexually transmitted diseases, unwanted pregnancies, fetal death, start sex really early, have to practice dangerous sexual practices, and get addicted to sex and pornography. Very clear statistical findings. And the higher the ACEs score, the more likely people are to be involved in all different kinds of violence, interpersonal violence, and to be more aggressive. So this was staggering to the people that did it and to the rest of us, because That's just not clear in the way most of us were taught. So with an ACEs score of 4 or more, people were twice as likely to smoke, 7 times more likely to be alcoholics, 6 times more likely to have sex before the age of 15, twice as likely to get diagnosed with cancer, all different kinds of cancer, twice as likely to have ischemic heart disease, 4 times as likely to suffer from lung disease, 12 times as likely to have attempted suicide, and 10 times more likely to have injected street drugs. So, you know, with all that's going on in the opiate epidemic, if we think we're going to fix that without dealing with what's happening to children, ain't going to happen. Okay, and then there's been a lot more follow-up studies after that. This is from the prevalence in 23 states. So this includes over 200,000 people. I think it's 52% female, so pretty reasonably even division. What they found is that 62% of this population had at least one ACE, and 25% reported 3 or more in 23 states. I end up in public health because, for me, this is the most important and pressing public health epidemic, although it's really not being treated like that. The higher exposure that people had who were unable to work, LGBTQ, unemployed, poor, with less than a high school education, or who were black, Hispanic, or multiracial, then the higher their exposure in all of those domains. And that makes sense. That incorporates then the social determinants of health. So we already know a lot about how damaging that is for people. What I have to tell you, though, it's really important, is that this is about risk. So the ACEs, I want you all to know that doing the ACEs survey does not predict for the individual person. So it is a statistical risk that we're talking about. And that matters a lot because you want to inform people about this. You want them to know what their risk is, but you don't want to think, well, I just might as well not do anything else because, you know, it's all over for me. That's not true. It's a statistical finding. It does not predict inevitability of outcomes. It only predicts the indicator of danger. Now, we did a urban ACEs study because those of us working in Philly said, well, yeah, but people in Philadelphia have a lot of other, yeah, I am not well coordinated right to left. People in Philadelphia have other things happen to them. So they did use the PHMC does a telephone survey and has been doing it for years. And so they included the ACEs questions and bullying, history of bullying, a history of living in foster care, racism, exposure to neighborhood lack of safety, and to community violence, okay? And then looked at what that meant for the population in Philly. And what we found was that 33% of Philadelphia adults experienced emotional abuse and 35% experienced physical abuse during childhood. Approximately 35% of adults grew up in a household with a substance abusing member, 24% lived in a household with someone who was mentally ill, and about 13% lived in a household with somebody who had spent time in prison. So if you then put all that together, which we did, what you get for our population is that only 17% have a 0 ACE score. Yeah, wow, is right. And half of the population will have been exposed to at least one conventional ACE and at least one expanded ACE. Right? And that's not good news. We know a lot now about what happens to kids. 1 out of every 4 girls in the United States is sexually abused. 1 out of every 6 boys. Over 50% of I'm on the wrong one. I'll go there. Over 50% there of all girls have experienced physical assault in their lifetime. Approximately 65% of adolescent girls are victims of some kind of abuse from a dating partner. So all of you working with adolescents, it's really important that you get that information. It's directly related then later to depression in adulthood. More than 1 in 9 children in the U.S. is exposed to family violence every year. Almost half of them who witness family violence also experience maltreatment themselves. In homes where there's violence, more than 1 in 3 incidents results in physical injury. And boys who witness family violence have a higher rate of becoming men who are violent. Approximately 50% will perpetrate such abuse. And children exposed to family violence commonly endure many other kinds of violence. And that's called polyvictimization. And this was a study of polyvictimization done by David Finkelhor. And this was over 4,000 children aged 2 to 17 and their caregivers. And it's really disturbing. Almost 2/3 of the sample were exposed to more than one type of victimization. And 30% experienced 5 or more types. 10% experienced 11 or more different forms of victimization in their young lifetimes. And that is highly related to trauma symptoms that are really complex and very difficult to manage for the person or for the helpers. And studies that have focused just on single incident victimization, not capturing that. They're actually underestimating what kids are really exposed to. And then, of course, there's urban exposure. Gun violence. 58% of American adults or someone they care for have experienced gun violence in their lifetime. Children at a pediatric clinic in Boston, 1 out of every 10 children had witnessed a shooting or stabbing before they were 6. And nearly 1 million women alive today have been shot or shot at by an intimate partner. So we got a huge problem. This is from Attorney General Holder under President Obama, really cared about this stuff. And he did a national task force on children and trauma. And what this task force came up with was that of 76 million children in the U.S., 46 million are exposed to violence, crime, abuse, and psychological trauma annually. That's 2 out of 3 kids. So you can bet that the vast majority of the people you work with have an experience or many experiences of childhood trauma. And that's what makes this such a big deal. It's not like there's some segment of the population we can focus special attention on and specialize in. It's everybody in our systems. And that's the power of the ACEs study, is that it tells us that these are really common, they relate to each other, they pile up and have a cumulative impact. They account for a huge kind of just astonishing percentage of our health and social problems. And it also means that people with exposure to ACEs are everywhere, and probably most people in this room. Because that's part of why the good part of what we do with that transformative stuff is that most people here have probably been exposed to some kind of childhood adversity, and you are using that and drawing on that to try to be of help to the world around you, to other people. And that's the power of transformation and post-traumatic growth. So if you're capable of that, anybody you work with is capable of that. And that's what you got to go for. ACEs are the main determinant, I've become convinced, I think many of us have, of the health and social well-being of the nation. And most people still don't know they even exist. There are so many people in this room who have, because you're in Philadelphia, and some of us like me have been talking about it ad nauseum for 30 years. But the general public has no clue. So don't assume that people know anything about all of this. And then there's adults. What happens to adults? Most people in this culture, we know from large epidemiological studies, will experience a traumatic event at some time in their lives. That goes way back. And the more the experience is interpersonal violence, the more likely the person is to suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder or any of a number of other problems that are associated with trauma. So we do better as a species after things like natural disasters. But when it's somebody else that violates us, we don't do good. It's just not a good thing we're a social species, so we don't take well to that. And rape, the rate's almost 50%. So every day we have 100 Americans are killed with guns. And if it's a domestic violence situation and there's a gun at hand, women are 5 times more likely to get killed. And then this is kind of staggering. Since 1968, between 1968 and 2015, more people have been killed by guns than in every war we've ever fought altogether, including the American Revolution. So we live in a complex, adaptive, living world that is absolutely filled with people who have had adverse individual, group, and intergenerational exposure to trauma and adversity. So what's the impact? Can we go through this pretty quickly? What's the impact? Well, we know that people are exposed to all different kinds of stress. So the ones on the left there, they're not going to really impact us. It's the ones on the right, relentless, toxic, and traumatic stress. When I said earlier that we have a problem with the word trauma because we're actually talking about a lot of other things, this is what I mean. That we're actually talking about other kinds of stress. And the relentless stress is also called, the fancy word for it is an increased allostatic load. So you all understand this in your own body. So you put on a backpack in the morning, you're cool. It's got a lot of stuff in it, but you're fine. And by the night, when you go to put it on after work, it's like, what the hell did I put in this backpack? And you didn't, nothing. You're just tired. Your body's gotten tired. It's been carrying a load of life that's normal, it's not abnormal, but suddenly it's heavier. So many people in our culture will, the new trauma will be the straw that breaks the camel's back because the camel already is carrying a heavy load. That's what allostatic load means. That's what I mean by relentless stress. And we often just kind of go, oh, well, you know, why did this person fall apart after that event? Well, this person is resilient and fine. Well, let's look at their load. Let's look at what they've been dealing with and adapting to that this just pushed them over the edge. What kinds of things do that? Poverty. Poverty is, as you all know, relentlessly stressful. Like, you can't go, oh, I'm just not going to work this weekend. I'm going to take a break from poverty. Right? You can't do that. You don't get a break. It's relentless. Parenting alone, we're not designed that way. So parenting alone is relentlessly stressful. Caring for several generations at the same time, having multiply challenged children, having severe injury in any close family member, having severe injury certainly or illness in a primary caregiver in a child. Relentlessly stressful, all those conditions, and you can probably think of a lot more that you see, right? But that's the undertone that people are under all the time. And they may be coping really well with all that up to a point, and then it's just too much. Because what do we experience when we're relentlessly stressed? I, for one, get really irritable and impatient. And if it goes on too long, you're likely to get depressed. But everybody around you is saying, oh, buck up. You're doing really well. And so there's all that shame. And you're more likely to make bad decisions. And you're way more likely to turn to something that's going to give you some relief. And you're not going to think ahead, oh, I'm not going to drink this even though it's going to help me because I might turn into an alcoholic. Or I know that this would feel good to take this drug, but I'm not going to do it because it might be addictive. That's not going to work. You're going to turn to whatever is going to give you some relief. Only then, now you don't have just one problem or two problems or 10 problems. Now you got 20 problems. And you're more likely to be violent because that's the way we are when we're irritable and stress is increasing. And that's a really bad formula for parenting. And this is often how the intergenerational transmission happens. You've got really stressed, relentlessly stressed parents who are also trying to do the very delicate and complex work of good parenting. So relentless stress in parents may lead to toxic stress in kids. And toxic stress is the term we use when we're talking about kids and their exposure to any kind of prolonged stress, because they don't have very good stress management systems in place yet at all. And therefore, that toxic stress interferes with the development of their brain. So when we look at all that ACEs stuff, that's why it's such a big deal. It got in the way of development, and it affects the way the brain actually literally gets built. So what happens when development is derailed? When there's a lack of stable and safe bridges to the future? When growth is stunted? Well, people don't necessarily break. But look at that middle picture. They bend over. And the more you bend over, if you're a tree, the less you're getting of the sunshine. So we do adapt. We are very adaptive. But the problem with the way we adapt is that often then we change our definitions of what's normal. And we don't even get close to defining what is healthy. So what do you see? You see a lot of problems with emotions. People are chronically irritable. They can't manage distressing feelings. They tend to lose control, become aggressive. It's really hard for them to tolerate frustration, so they can't persist with efforts that may demand a lot of challenging and are tedious. And they often have a lot of trouble putting their feelings into words. It's called alexithymia. It means in Latin, it's a word for the absence of words for feelings, literally. It's very highly associated with people having somatic symptoms later, expressing the only way they can then is express their feelings through their bodies, through the symptoms that they have in their bodies. So enormous problems with emotional management. And then over time, we call those things symptoms. And we try to just treat the symptoms without actually getting to the cause of the symptoms. And you might have noticed it's not very easy. It doesn't work really well. Problems with empathy. So if you've had a lot of moral injury, then you have had to shut down emotional contagion. You have had to shut down your feelings of distress for somebody else. So you don't respond to the distress of others. And you may have what's called cognitive empathy, where you can figure out what another person feels. You just don't give a damn. And those folks are much more likely to use their cognitive empathy to manipulate other people, but they don't really feel emotional empathy, which is the feeling of being concerned about distress in somebody else. Problems with social skills. Just understanding the social cues, knowing what's going on socially, getting into a group, starting a conversation, really basic things that we don't, because they would have happened when we were so little, we don't even look at the kind of the superstructure of social processes. But it's things like being able to go into a group and not be paralyzed with shame. Seeking attention in appropriate ways. We all want attention. Look at me. I'm up here in front of a couple hundred people. Everybody wants attention. So that it's, when you hear, if you hear something like, oh, they're just trying to get attention, you want to question that. Of course they want to get attention, but they may not know how to do that well. So it's not that you can discourage people wanting to get attention, but you can help them figure out how to get it for good stuff. And appreciating how their behavior is impacting other people is a really important social skill. Then problems with thinking, cognitive biases. You know, it can go from nobody likes me, I'm terrible, to I'm always right. Understanding what's being said, doing things in a logical way, seeing grays, working with time, reflecting on multiple thoughts or ideas at the same time, difficulty taking into account the context of a situation, maintaining focus and attention. All of that can be disrupted. And that, of course, then interacts with all your emotional problems, and then you end up with these really chronic problems. Then there's problems with change. So how do we learn how to make transitions? We're in kindergarten when we learn that. And the teacher lines us all up and, you know, has us sing a song, and we all walk together, right? That's how we learn how to manage transitions. If that didn't happen, then we don't ever learn. So we don't look out into what's going to happen next. We get really out of control whenever there's a change. Traumatized people have a lot of trouble using their imagination. You used your imagination to get here today, because you probably don't live here, although you might feel like you live here. You don't. So you used your imagination to get here. We use it all the time. Traumatized people have enormous trouble with that because they've had to spend so much of their life in the here and now of danger, even when there's no danger, because they become chronically hyper-aroused. So they can't think about the consequences of what they're going to do. They can't look out into what happens next. They can't plan. So you really have to help them with that if you're going to help them, because these problems only equip somebody to go back to prison. If you need that much structure, if you need somebody to tell you what to do all the time, otherwise you feel anxious because nobody's really helped you learn how to tolerate change, then you're only fit for prison. And then we put people in prison, and we do all that, and then they don't learn anything, of course, right? Because we know that the prison population has very high ACEs scores. And then problems in moral development. So you'll see people that are really stuck in an early developmental stage. So they may be in an 18-year-old or a 25-year-old or a 50-year-old body, but they're still 2. They're still thinking like a 3-year-old. The lack of empathy interferes with development. They may become preoccupied with one-way revenge, one-way justice, and not be able to make any sense out of their lives at all. Life becomes chaotic, and that leads to criminal thinking. Okay, let me just time check. We're good? I'm good? Okay, fine. Okay, we got time. So I want to tell you about the human stress response. The brain is the central organ of stress and adaptation, both through all the biological embedding I've been talking about from attachment, and then the cumulative wear and tear. I'm supposed to say wear, not war. The unconscious mind, you know. The cumulative wear and tear of the physical and the social environment, and the brain and the body acting through all of the systems, the complex systems that are our physical symptoms. So trauma theory is this comprehensive biopsychosocial and philosophical model for understanding the human response to overwhelming stress. Remember I said earlier, it's universal. So when we can understand this, we can understand things we haven't been able to understand about humanity across the globe. It's because we all have bodies. And our bodies react the same way, pretty much, no matter where we are. It's just part of our species. So the stress response, however, that you have today did not evolve to meet the needs of our complex, psychologically tormented lives. So our stress response system becomes more damaging than the stressor themselves. Why? Well, we can anticipate the future. So we can worry ourselves into illness about things that have not happened and maybe will not ever happen. And we can ruminate about things that have already happened that we cannot change. And our stress response just keeps us stuck in the past. But when we get triggered in that way, our bodies evoke the same now problematic responses as whatever the original thing was that we should have been scared of and that we had to defend against. So that's a problem. But that's part of the human species. That's the way we roll. So I want to tell you a little bit. This is going to be trauma theory in brief. We're going to zoom through, but I hope that you will probe more deeply, that you will take it upon yourselves to learn more so that you become really fluent and able, as I said, to be teachers of all of this. So what does trauma do? Well, it changes our central nervous system. We become chronically hyperaroused. What that means is that we become hypersensitive to even very minor threats. So we get jumpy, irritable, hair-triggered tempers. We're likely to engage in very extremist thinking and respond to many things like they're a threat to life even when they're not. And this is a setup for increased aggression and a loss of impulse control. And it is central nervous system. Nobody's choosing that. They didn't have any control over that at all. It's a result of a traumatic experience, or more likely, many traumatic experiences. Then there's dissociation, also part of virtually every traumatic experience. Dissociation, and it would be better if this word was disassociation, because that would make more sense. But for some reason, we took off some of the letters. I don't know why. But dissociation is the loss of integrated function of different components of our being. So you can dissociate your stuff from your body. You can dissociate your memories and forget things. You can dissociate feelings. You can dissociate all of that. You can dissociate your identity. You can split along all of the parts of us that when we were babies weren't integrated yet. But as we developed, they normally became all integrated. So we don't see all those functions as separate functions. But they can separate again under the impact of overwhelming traumatic experiences. The latest evolutionary add-on for our species is language. So one of the first things to go under the impact of trauma is language. We stop encoding the most traumatic aspects of an experience and putting it into words. That turns out to be a huge problem. So dissociation is life-saving in the short term. It keeps us from dying of fright. You can die of fright. You can die of a broken heart. Your heart can stop, right? That rarely happens because of this nifty defense. So it's great in the short term. Huge problem when it stays that way, when Humpty Dumpty doesn't come back together again. Not good, all right? But Humpty Dumpty doesn't just reassemble spontaneously, a lot of times. And I always find that really interesting. Why not? Or how did the species end up, and how do we survive so long with all of the trauma we've had as long as we've been humans? How did we survive when I know the damage that this does? And I think, this is just a kind of an aside, but for all of you who might be expressive arts therapy, this is for you. I think our naturally evolved abilities lie within the expressive arts. So in your programs, if you don't have availability, you keep advocating until you get art therapy and movement therapy and psychodrama and all of it, because you are not going to be able to get the results that you want without it. We had all of that because I come from an earlier era, and it made a huge difference. And it's because that way people can heal from dissociation without even having to do all this painful trauma work. They can just help themselves to heal. And think about all of the arts programs lost out of schools, lost out of communities, not funded adequately, it's my bandwagon. So it's like, it's like cutting off our arms. It doesn't make any sense. Okay. Trauma interferes with normal cognitive function. So a person in that chronically hyperaroused and or dissociated state can't maintain proper attention and focus, make good decisions, exercise good judgment. It's really hard to learn new things when your mind and your body are focused on imminent danger. And of course, in order to really function well cognitively, we have to be able to use our anticipatory cognitive functions of imagination. And if we can't, if you hear somebody saying, that's a person that never thinks about the consequences before they act, you're talking about a trauma survivor. All of this interferes with memory processing, and people who suffer from post-traumatic syndromes have too little or too much or both. They're haunted by the past. And a lot of it we think has to do with the loss of language. That language shut off, so the worst parts of the experience were not verbally encoded. And the reason why that's so important is, well, it's important for therapy if it's verbal psychotherapy, because whatever you haven't processed or put into words, you can't talk about to anybody else. So you can't share it, but you also can't share it with yourself. So thinking is based on words. So without words, then we can't think about what happened to us. We can't talk about it, can't think about it. So you can't process it because it's not really there, but it is there. In fact, it's haunting you. And how does it manifest? Through what we call symptoms. What we call symptoms are actually the nonverbal brain, which turns out to be our right hemisphere. It's the nonverbal brain going, yo, can't you see there's something wrong with me? I am living on the street and I am drug addicted. Can't you see that that's a problem? There's something wrong with me. Only the person has to use us as the intermediary in order to get to the verbal encoding. So that when we just give them a diagnosis and said, well, it's a drug addict, right? We haven't helped anything. We've got to listen to that nonverbal brain speaking. What is it trying to tell us? It needs to tell the person, but we're going to have to be the translator. We're going to have to really figure out what the symptoms mean, what they tell us about the past, what's already happened, and then help figure out how to integrate that. So yes, all of the expressive arts, but also there are specific trauma resolution therapies that are out now, like EMDR, which we think is, and all the back and forth left-right stuff, is about integrating the brain. So there are many people now who believe that the right hemisphere is the unconscious mind, that it's not down there, it's just over there. And that's a really different metaphor for us in helping people to heal, is you don't have to dredge up you don't have to, no, actually, you just have to get that information from over there into over here, put it together, put it into words, and then be able to let go of it. And why? Because it's about time. Time is verbal. A sense of something occurring in time is part of our context of experience. It's a timeline that moves from the past into the present. The nonverbal mind doesn't have time. It's timeless. So whatever you experience in that state, it's happening now. It's not happening in the past. So the point of integrating that and getting people to put the Humpty Dumpty together is to be able to make the past already. You don't have to keep living like this. You don't have to go on being haunted by this. But you are going to have to do some hard work to put it all together again, because it couldn't have been easy to be Humpty Dumpty. And that is really literally true. People have to know what the path of recovery is. Part of the early psychoeducation is kind of letting them know what's in store. And it won't be nearly as bad when they actually do it as they fear that it's going to be. But you do have to, they have to be a heads up, and going to have to buck up in order to really remember and talk about and share and know themselves what really happened. Instead, the way it comes out is through flashbacks and nightmares and triggers that are stimulated in the environment. Oops, wait. Okay. Then all of this, of course, as you can imagine, interferes with having good relationships. If people that you've been supposed to be able to trust in early childhood particularly have betrayed your trust and hurt you, well, you'd have to be loony to trust other people. Why would you do that? You've already seen that people can't be trusted. So the logical thing to do is not trust anybody. And it doesn't matter, when that's already happened to somebody, it doesn't matter how trustworthy you are as a helper. It doesn't matter how kind you are. It doesn't matter how knowledgeable you are. They're not going to trust you. You are going to have to work really hard to help them heal in order to get that trust. Because they have to learn how to trust. Not just you, but it's about social relationships. So you're going to see people that are withdrawn, who isolate whenever they get scared. You're likely to see people who seek out similarly affected peers. So think about gangs. Think about peer groups that are really unhealthy for people. Peer groups can be really great, but they can be very unhealthy because they just kind of keep perpetuating the same old thing. And you're not going to learn how to do well with conflict, because that's a pretty sophisticated social skill. And the stuff that you do, the symptoms that you have, the way you behave with people, the way you act paranoid, you don't trust when somebody's really been kind, that's going to turn people off. So you're going to lose whatever social support that maybe you had. And you will adapt to adversity, but you're going to develop now a whole panoply of symptoms. What does that look like? Well, substance abuse, cutting, self-harming behavior. Self-harming behavior, by the way, is related to the chemical response that's part of stress. Part of the stress response is a release of our own opiates. We make opiates. That's why we can get addicted to opiates, because we make them. And they're there for pain control. So they're part of the stress response because in our evolutionary past, if you were really stressed and scared, it was probably related to a big hungry animal that wanted to eat you. And if you got hurt, it was just a really good thing if the endorphins flew out and you didn't feel it, you keep on running. So whenever we get stressed, there's also an endorphin release. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to cut yourself, bang your head against the wall, pull your hair out. And then that becomes addictive because, as we know, opiates are really addictive. Only now, it's all, you're doing it yourself. So thinking you can punish people out of self-harming behavior doesn't work. You have to find something that at least as good that helps them in stressful conditions that is not harming their bodies. And once people understand what it's about, they often are, they want to change it. So, but if they don't understand it, it's really hard to change it. Risk-taking, similarly, taking risks gives you a buzz. You get adrenaline. You get the endorphins zipping around. You affect your own chemistry. Same thing with provoking fights. You affect your own chemistry, and then it becomes addictive, and that's called addiction to trauma. So now we've got somebody that's got multiple problems, not just one. They got a lot of problems. And they've adapted all along the way. So for them, it's become normal, and they formed habits. And habits are really hard for us to change because once something becomes a habit, it goes into a part of our brains that we don't have any conscious control over. It goes into a part of our brains called the basal ganglia. And we can't tell the basal ganglia what to do. So habits, all of this, all of the way people adapt are associated with this whole realm of habits. And healing then has to be going backwards, kind of gradually undoing, developing new and better habits, helping people to understand all along the way, a lot of encouragement, a lot of support. Okay, so people are signaling through their fragmentation through their symptoms. It's a really different way to think. And then, it's a huge problem because then we give people these labels when really they should just be signals. And one of the dynamics of trauma is that people compulsively reenact trauma. And when I tried to figure out why, I went, well, I think they're compulsively reenacting trauma because they're not getting the response they need. And that response is from their social group. It's from other people, right? So if somebody is reenacting something that's happened to them, and they don't know that, and you don't know it because they haven't told you because they can't tell you, they're compulsively reenacting something from the past, and then we give them a diagnosis. What does a diagnosis do? If you don't know what's wrong with you, it can be mildly comforting. But it also says there's something wrong with you. It doesn't say what happened to you. It says there's something wrong with you. You are not like other human beings. You are defective in some way. And we don't usually tell them whether or not they'll ever not have the diagnosis. And I just think it's not helpful when actually what the person is doing is signaling, they're telling us their story, but they're telling it in a nonverbal way. We've largely lost the ability to interpret nonverbal information, so we don't get what they're saying. It's like a different language. And so they are stuck there. Of course they're going to keep signaling out to their social group that something's wrong, something's wrong, something's wrong. It hurts, it hurts, it hurts, it hurts.
It's not endorphin.
Sometimes that does have related to the endorphins. So sometimes people are reenacting something that also implicates the chemistry. But it's also a sign if you see people or you work with people and you've done a lot of work with them and they're still reenacting, they're stuck in loss. And that took us a long time to get to because we just didn't get it. That they were really stuck in being unable to grieve because grieving is a social process. It doesn't just happen to the individual person. Grieving occurs in interaction with our social group. And if all the social group representatives have done is given you a label and tell you you're weird and crazy and sick and not like other people, not really helpful. So I hope you get what I mean by why this is such a big deal and what I mean by a paradigm shift. Like this is huge for the mental health system. Huge. What are we going to, we don't get any money if we don't give people a diagnosis. There's no funding. It's the way the whole system, remember the system structure issue? The whole system is rigged to have this happen, to deny the trauma. Big deal. And if this is going on and you're not getting through and you keep reenacting and your life is just going downhill, eventually you become morally degraded. You have had and suffered profound experiences of moral injury. You're likely to have all kinds of problems with authority figures, do whatever it takes to stay alive, deeply feel shame but not be able to do anything with it, and be profoundly demoralized, lose hope. And then, is it any wonder people then often off themselves? Okay. So the short version of this is here. A traumatic event happens. The person is overwhelmed by definition. Their central nervous system is overwhelmed. If it isn't, then it's probably not really defined as a trauma. And then you respond in all the ways I've been telling you about. Your nervous system has become sensitized. You have changes in your brain architecture because the brain never stops developing. And then life keeps going. It keeps delivering things, often not good things, to people. And so you're having all kinds of painful emotional states. And then you start having flashbacks and nightmares and body memories. The body starts telling you what's going on, and you keep going to doctors, and they don't help you. They just basically farm you out because they think you're just crazy. And then one of several things is likely to happen. One of the things that might happen is that you might retreat, just say give it up. Isolation, dissociation, more dissociation, depression, anxiety. You might start doing harm to yourself and get involved with substance abuse, suicidality, self-harming behavior. You may do harm to others because it feels better to hurt somebody else than just to tolerate the depression yourself. And that's a pathway to aggression and violence and empathic failure. Or you might do all three of them. And that leads to, or is a reflection of, post-traumatic stress disorder, sociopathy, all kinds of things that we call mental illness. And what is most usefully called complex PTSD, but we're just not allowed to use that because the DSM won't let us. And if you look, I would advise you, if you're dealing with really complex problems with people, do a timeline with them. You don't have to remember anything about this. This is a scary slide. But it's to indicate that if you can get the timeline for them, if they can stand back and look at that, they'll see why. They'll see what happened. It's really helpful for you and for them to get a sense of, to get to the place where you go, wow, how did they survive that? How are they still going? What in the world are the strengths this person has to keep going? So what do you see and what do you hear? What might be as a result of all this? What's really going on? So if you hear, boy, doesn't take anything to set that guy off. Somebody with a hair trigger temper, doesn't take any kind of stimulation. They're crawling the walls. What might really be going on? Well, chronic hyperarousal. That's somebody that's chronically hyperaroused. They're responding to threat. They may have just had a flashback. They're being triggered by things in the environment, and they don't know what's triggering them in the beginning. It just happens. Suddenly they're just diving under the desk. And then you go, well, this person was in Afghanistan, and a helicopter just went overhead. Oh, maybe that's what it was. But you got to be a Sherlock Holmes. And so do they, because they won't know that. It's all in the nonverbal sphere. This person's really going to hurt somebody someday. Aggression, bullying, fighting, even in very young children. We need to identify these kids. We need to identify little kids who are not developing empathy. There's something wrong with them. Their brain is being hurt. We need to find out who they are and help them. Trauma, of course, causes a fight response. It's the most basic human instinct. And we would rather be powerful and not helpless. We really find helplessness pretty toxic. So if it means that somebody else is going to get hurt in the process, oh well. She is sick all the time. She's just got multiple somatic symptoms. What may be going on? She may be having flashbacks. And flashbacks can present as body memories, that the body remembers what the mind forgets. And stress contributes to at the same time and causes many physical problems. And then it may be the only way the person has of expressing their feelings is through their body and the reactions that they need to get from other people. And they may be, it's also an indicator that they've been really fragmented, probably at the time of the traumatic event. Bless you. Cool sneeze. Okay. That guy has nothing but complaints, just complaining all the time. So what you're seeing is somebody that is really irritable, impatient, has a very low frustration tolerance. What might be going on? Well, this might be somebody that's really having trouble sleeping. And having flashbacks at night, chronically hyperaroused, chronically irritable. And so they need sleep. So this is somebody that's always prepared for the worst. If he wouldn't drink or do drugs or shoplift or gamble, whatever it is, then this wouldn't have happened. It's their own fault. So self-destructive behavior that appears to be choice, appears to be driven by choice. What may be going on? Well, it might have been the only coping skills that the person could use at the time of the trauma, and now it's become habitual, and now the coping skills have themselves become survival threats. How about this person, could be a kid, could be an adult, can't sit still, hyperactive, fidgeting, constant movement, can't focus. Ever hear of anybody like that? Well, what may be going on? Well, how about they're hypervigilant? So people who have experienced violence and abuse become very tuned in to any early sign that is going to happen again. They're always on the lookout for danger. But the downside of that is that they overlook other important information. So they don't use, so this is the person that you can say 25 times something positive, but they only hear the one time you said something minorly critical. Because they're really tuned in to what's dangerous, not to the good stuff. Things go, oh wait, where am I? Oh, don't want to go that one yet. Here's my coordination again. There it is. Things go in one ear and out the other. That's somebody who has difficulty retaining information, forgetful, distractible. What may be going on? Well, trauma does that. It causes us to only attend to what is threatening. And the other things that are tagged for danger are important or attended to, but the other things are ignored. She's a pathological liar. She's always making things up. But when you listen, the stories don't really make any sense. Like, she's lying about something that you witnessed, and you know it didn't happen. This may have a familiar ring if you watch the news. So actually, she gets caught out a lot. She's just a really bad liar. What's going on? Collusion. Well, there is collusion, but it's probably it's probably dissociation. If that's somebody that's dissociated, and what we do is we fill in whenever there's a gap in our memory, we fill it in. It's called confabulation, because it just is really uncomfortable to have something that we don't remember when we should remember it. So we fill in the missing pieces. It's like a tornado hits wherever she goes. So this is a person, and it's just gendered just to not be boring, but she's causes chaos everywhere. Did you ever see anybody like that? Or where they go? And they're provoking of other people all the time. What's going on there? Well, this may be somebody that is really addicted to trauma. This is the chemical thing. And so they'll provoke other people in order to get that rush. That adrenaline kicks in, and they feel better. So when you're working with somebody like that, you want to try to get to the feeling before all that happened. Help them to see that it's anxiety, it's fear that then drives the rest of it. He just can't make any friends. He's a weird kid. Nobody likes him. Poor social skills. Doesn't trust anybody. What may be going on? Well, trauma causes disrupted attachment. And if loving and trusting leads to pain, then don't do it. Trauma bonding is the other side of the coin. That's when you bond to someone who actually is the person who hurts you, because it's a confusion of the attachment system. Normally, our attachment system activates and gets stronger whenever we're in danger. That's why, for those of you old enough to remember 9/11, everybody phoned home. Everybody wanted to get home and get with their loved ones. Not because there was any danger, really, anymore. It had already happened. But because that's what we do. We increase attachment whenever we're really scared. So when you're being battered or hurt or violated by someone you're also attached to, it's very confusing. And that's how you get a trauma bond. Okay, that's Trauma 101 in brief. Go deeper, learn more, be conversant with the language. Okay, there are some barriers to recovery. So they're likely to have disrupted attachment. They may be trauma bonded. They're going to have issues with trust. They're unlikely to make connections between what's going on now and previous experiences, and they're not going to want to talk about it. So you're going to have to be really confident yourself and know how to help people be able to do that, often by educating them a lot first. They're likely not to remember the worst parts of their experiences, and they're going to want to stay numb rather than feel this awful stuff and feel it again. They're likely to feel protective towards violence that occurred in their family of origin because we're loyal. That's, it's another way we roll. So it's hard to look back in your childhood and look at the mistakes that your parents made or just that they were awful. And the violence may still be going on. You often are the last person to know that it's still happening. They don't want to talk about it, and we haven't wanted to hear it either. So that's been a system issue for a long time. And we've pretended that giving somebody a diagnosis and medication is treatment. Well, it's actually often a barrier because it creates self-fulfilling prophecies. And caregiving systems have not incorporated this knowledge. You guys are doing well. You are incorporating it, but that's not everywhere. And so you're going to interface with lots of systems that you're not going to be on the same page with. And our helping systems as a whole are fragmented. They don't share the same assumptions, language, goals, or vision of what it is we're trying to achieve. So we need some new ideas. Some tips for you guys. First of all, always remember, it's not what's wrong with you, it's what happened. Do any of you know Joe Fodorero? My buddy Joe, you know Joe? Okay. It's Joe that said that in 1991 at a team meeting we were having. It's become a meme. Oprah said it last year. Educate everybody in trauma theory, attachment theory, group dynamics and systems theory, in the individual and organizational impact of chronic stress, and what healing looks like. How do people recover? Really important. And trauma recovery begins with psychoeducation. You can go a long way. It's amazing. Once people get what this is all about, people who have formerly been non-compliant will start to work with you. They will really start to do the work they need to do because now they get it. They get what it's about and what it is they have to do. So the value of a psychoeducational framework, I cannot overemphasize that. It gets everybody on the same page. If it's done in a group, it provides peer support, so people are learning from each other. It helps develop empathy. You can use all kinds of modalities. You can use films. You can use literature. You can incorporate the arts. We have a psychoed framework we developed called SELF. It stands for Safety, Emotions, Loss, and Future. And it helps people find words and recognize patterns. And it organizes chaos. That's the incredible beginning value in recovery. You don't need any prior educational achievements in order to learn about this stuff, but it rings bells. People get it. There's not a lot of, you don't have to use a lot of complicated words or concepts that are just psychobabble. It's just like all of our experience. We've all been through these things. So it's true to people's experience, but I think the most important thing that psychoeducation does is it begins to change people's identity of themselves. And we inadvertently have done a lot of harm, I think, my opinion, to people's identity by the processes that our systems compel us to use. And that, in order for people to heal, they have to feel like, I can do this. I'm okay. I'm not crazy. It may totally make sense why I do the things I do, but it's time for me to do something different. So complex problems deserve complex solutions. Train everybody. Train everybody on your staff, not just direct service people, but indirect service people, because in a system, everybody's connected to everybody else. It may be the front office person, the person that the person first sees when they come in the office, that has the most impact. And that if they've had a bad experience with that person, forget about working with that person. It's not going to work well. Assess for trauma, adversity, and toxic stress. There's really good instruments out that you can use to look at the complexity of all this and develop a timeline. I wish we could still do neuropsychological and projective psychological testing because that was incredibly valuable. So I'm telling you that as an for your advocacy piece, that you have to advocate to be able to do that kind of underneath look kind of testing that has gone out of fashion, and that's terrible. Think about the possibility of adversity as the underlying problem no matter what you're seeing, because it helps you be less frustrated. Everybody had a childhood. That includes everybody you work with, all of your colleagues. You're not just about creating a safe place for your clients. It also has to be a safe place for you in order to do the work. Like that airplane thing with the oxygen mask, put it on you before, yeah, it's that. Like if we're not okay and if we're not okay with each other, if we can't resolve our conflicts, then we're not going to be of much use to the people who really are testing our frustration tolerance. Recognize that trust will be an ongoing issue and that power will be a central concern because of experiences of toxic helplessness. So the whole, at every level, the issue of power and the distribution of power. If you can't understand why somebody does or doesn't do something that seems to be just common sense, then be curious. Wonder what happened. We have to do what we can to prevent, see, you wasn't watching you. Okay. Cool pictures. I forgot. Okay. Do what we can to prevent damage, further damage to the brain and the body. That may require medications to really help diminish ongoing harm. Teach new cognitive skills. Teach emotional management skills. Obviously, treat the addictive symptoms, whatever the person's addicted to. And then there are specific trauma resolution techniques that I mentioned to you that are really amazingly helpful. Take the time to ask the right questions. And that's really hard, I know. Everybody's on a productivity schedule. That's because of old paradigm thinking. Old paradigm thinking treats organizations like they're machines and treats you all like widgets. And so this is a major system issue. These are huge systemic issues that have to change because we need the time to talk to people to do all this. And the long run gain is enormous. If people stop being sick, stop being high utilizers, heal their bodies, I mean, in the long run, huge savings for the culture. But to do that, you've got to be able to do the work. All behavior has meaning. It's happening in the present, but it's a reenactment of the past, so you got to make sense out of it. There has to be an emphasis on health. So you have to have a clear idea about what healthy is. You might want to look at, a bunch of psychologists have come up with a psychodynamic system of diagnosing people that is really based on health and competency rather than disease and disorder. You might want to look it up. It's really interesting. And then we have to take a systems approach to all of these problems. Rebuild trust if it's broken. You want people to have corrective emotional and relational experiences. Means you have to know how to resolve conflicts and you got to teach them. You have to be able to do grief work, redefine social justice, and inspire hope. So ask about the trauma history like you would any other part of the medical or psychiatric history. It doesn't mean you have to fix it right away. And say things like, at some point in their lives, many people have experienced extremely distressing events, or a bad accident, combat, physical or sexual assault. Have you had any experiences like that? Use, doing it again. You're going to think I'm really quite limited. Okay. Use behavioral language. Were you ever sexually abused? Did anyone ever force you to have sex with them, including unwanted touching against your will? Don't do that. Instead, go, and the same about physical abuse, the same go, has anyone ever hit you repeatedly or physically harmed you or sexually harmed you? You don't have to go into details. You can be matter-of-fact, direct, supportive, and encouraging. You don't, the advantage, one of the big advantages of the ACEs questions is you don't have to know who sexually abused them, how much, how often, none of that. You just find out and you know it's a risk factor. Make no assumptions about how the person has been affected. Ask them. And also ask about how the event strengthened them as well. How it played a role in who they are. Write everything down. When people are stressed, our brains don't work well. So it's better if they know what your directions are. Provide psychoeducational materials that are freely available now on the internet. Encourage activities that are self-soothing. So you don't want a therapist to be the only way that people can calm themselves down. You want them to have experience of calming down with you, and that then translates into things they can do for themselves. Encourage, as I've said, made the pitch already for the role of creativity. And promote as much mastery self-help as possible. Involve people in their own care. Educate them, talk about triggers, use imagination to explore different outcomes, and develop a safety plan. Have them write it down and rehearse it with you. Different circumstances. How are they going to deal with different triggering circumstances? And assess for losses and prepare them that they're going to have to do grief work. Okay. I'm going to take just a couple minutes to finish. Okay. So just some implications to take all this, because I'm supposed to talk about why it's such a big deal, and I'm going to finish with why it's such a big deal. We can't solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. Einstein said that. So we need some new thinking, and we're in a race with time. Rebecca Costa has written about this thing called the cognitive threshold, which is the point at which a society can no longer think its way out of its problems because they've become too complex. The study of early civilizations that she did suggests that there are two telltale signs prior to a literal collapse of a civilization. What are those signs? The first one is gridlock. The second, and gridlock occurs when the problems are just too complex and we stop even saying we can do anything about them and we're just going to pass them on to the next generation. Then as conditions grow more desperate, the second symptom appears, which is the substitution of beliefs for knowledge and fact. When complexity makes knowledge impossible to obtain, we go to beliefs. We accept assumptions and unproven ideas about our existence and the world around us. So it's the unilateral confusion between beliefs and fact and a gradual abandonment of empirical evidence. That's what we are on the edge of. So when I say there's not a lot of time, that it's urgent, I really mean that quite literally. Because once a society begins exhibiting these first two signs, then the way is set for a complete collapse. Maybe not next year, hopefully not in my lifetime. I'm selfish. But if we don't turn this around, it's pretty clear where it's going to go. We are up against a lot as a species. We are first up against our biology. We are geared for fight, flight, freeze responses, short-term, not long-term planning. Not real good at that yet. We resist loss, and therefore we resist change, because all change involves loss. And death scares us stupid. And we want individual rights. We're not so sure about the responsibility part. We're globally connected, but we are still a tribal species. And we remain at a very early moral stage of development, far behind what we're able to achieve technologically. And that's where we're at. So this is why we need to break out of the shell and have the paradigm shift. For medicine, for healthcare, it means enormous changes because we're still really guided by the mind-body dichotomy. It means changing what we're calling healthy, changing what we mean by health. If it's not survivable, how can it be healthy? How can we even consider ourselves healthy as a society if we're hurting, doing permanent damage to that many children? So I already talked to you about the difference between sickness and injury. Sickness puts the responsibility back on the individual. Injury says, wait a minute, injuries occur within a context. How about changing definitions of good and badness, which has everything to do with the justice system? When bad people are also injured people, when good people do bad things, how do we decide who's good and who's bad? So that brings us smack up against our need to get even and find somebody to blame, the retributive impulse. Uh-oh. That's a huge paradigm shift for the justice system. And then we got this thing, we're still organized around male violence. Male violence, male dominance, and male oppression by men and of men, beginning in childhood, is this dirty little secret we don't want to, none of us, male or female, want to deal with. And yet, we're not going to get anywhere unless we deal with that, because that's what we see every day, all day long. It's evolutionary. We divided, we specialized as a species into gender and differences in hormones as a result, because male aggression was really important in our survival. It was the only way we had to have really strong, big-muscled and aggressive men who wanted to kill things. And it's the only way we prevailed in an environment where we were surrounded by hungry animals that wanted to eat us. The problem is that if we don't do something about that somehow, we are not going to make it. And it's a lot about managing testosterone because it's chemical and it's social. We remain organized around war, organized around aggression in an age that demands peace if life is going to survive. And I know that's hard to take in, but I don't think that when you look at the numbers, there's no way to get around it. And men are going to have to take this on somehow to save the rest of us. It means redefining what's rational and irrational. How can it be rational in the context we're talking about to have 200 million guns in this one country? What does it indicate that 35% of college males might commit rape if they could get away with it? And of course then, the Holocaust and climate change and nuclear disaster and so forth. Is that normal? Is that rational? What is normal and what is abnormal? If a majority of adults have experienced childhood adversity and trauma that was preventable, what is wrong with us? And when are we going to get a grip? Back in 1920, one of my heroes said, normality is merely unconsciousness on a cooperative basis. And then the importance of childhood. I've done that with you guys. Individual rights, divorce from social responsibility. What about, we need to have complex interactions about all these things. Is free speech really free if we deny the Holocaust and we influence the young in really bad ways? I don't know. I don't have answers for all this, but it's conversations we need to have. Child pornography, what is with that? Violence on TV, gun control, white supremacy. What? Yo, there's something wrong with us. So how do we balance freedom with things that are actually creating trauma for millions of people? How do we do that? We don't know how to do that. And free will, I know. Free will. What about free will? Is our will really free if it's determined by what happened to us when we were little kids? And what about unconsciousness? Much of what we do is unconscious. So how do we make what is unconscious conscious? And is it wrong to fail to protect, to fail to act, to help as it is to actively hurt? In the law it isn't. So how do we manage this? And what does it all mean for our values? What are our values? What's being represented on our TV screens every night in the news about our values? And are we ever going to talk about that? I love this quote. All organizations are perfectly designed to get the results they're now getting. And that's what our systems are, designed to get the results we're getting. So these are not individual issues, they are issues for everybody. So we have to figure out how we are going to increase the likelihood that collective intelligence will emerge. And I talk about this with all of you guys because where does the expertise lie? Does it lie in the business community or the banking community? No. It lies in this room. You know about human beings and you know about human nature. You need to experiment. How do we get collective solutions to complex problems? And then you got to blab it a lot. You got to get out there and talk about what you find. Because the rest of the world desperately needs that kind of collective intelligence, and it's in short supply right now. So you have a lot you can still do. Okay, I'll finish.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think if the goal was to show us what's the big deal about trauma, you certainly did that, and really just highlighting the complexity of the issue, the importance of a trauma-informed lens, and the need for all of us in this room to be advocates to help that paradigm shift move along. So thank you. Before you go, and I'll give you the PDF. You can put it on your website. Did you hear that? We're going to get the PDF so everyone can see that. Before we go, there are two things. One is we have a little something for you that we want to present. And before we eat lunch, and I know everyone's hungry, we have a couple announcements about the afternoon, so don't go yet. But I'm going to kind of grab this. Yes. Oh, you do need the mic drop. Okay. So we have to present to you as a small token of appreciation a piece of artwork from one of our artists from the Center for Creative Works. And she is able to be with us today. Her name is Kelly Brown, and I want to tell you just a little bit about Kelly. She was born in 1968 with a developmental disability and hearing loss. Her visual abilities have deteriorated progressively since 1991, and she is now almost completely blind, but communicates fluently in sign and sign through touch. And she's worked at the Center for Creative Works since its beginning in 2011. Without the ability to see, speak, or hear, Kelly acquires information about the work she is making entirely through touch, using her hands, arms, and feet to receive information to create her sculptures. When she encounters her completed work, she smiles, signs, laughs as her memory recalls her pieces, like meeting old friends, meandering past the rough and bumpy surfaces, tangling her feet in the tentacle-like strands that extend up to the floor and reaching up to the tops. On behalf of RHD and Kelly, we would like to want to present to you one of Kelly's beautiful woven sculptures.
Put it on my wall. Thank you. Thank you. How do you say thank you?
She's just going to fill your face.
Okay.
She loves hugs.
Two more minutes, promise. Thank you to everyone on the simulcast, too. We appreciate you joining us today.